All right, welcome everybody to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture. Um, as many of you know, I think most people here probably saw the interview that I carried out a couple of months ago with Peter Scholz that blew my mind, and I know blew a lot of people's minds based on the feedback that I got, which was really wonderful. Peter is somebody who has worked more than I think anybody that I know, or probably I would venture to say anybody alive in Canada on the physical economic potential of Canada and really thinking through concrete, practical pathways towards making big projects happen once again, as they did before I was born. But I've heard stories. I like history. So I see how we built up our nation's capacities over many generations of people who had vision, people who had a certain passion for being human and leaving something better for future generations. And that's an instinct that we've unfortunately fallen away from. And hopefully, in the current crisis, we can be shaken back into being human once again and thinking in those natural, very long term scopes with an appreciation for the importance of industry, of real infrastructure building, and the role of the sovereign nation state in helping to make this sort of thing happen. So, Peter has agreed to generously share a follow up presentation, adding to and maybe recapitulating a lot of the ideas, and especially now at this moment in history when the Arctic is heating up and the battleground of whether this unexplored frontier is going to be a domain of cooperation amongst nations for a better world, or is it going to be a domain of warfare? We don't know, but there's a fight over what that's going to be. And so, Peter, I appreciate very much you taking the time, and I'm going to take my notebook, I'm going to get ready to learn a lot. And also, for people who don't know, what our protocol is, once Peter's finished his formal remarks, put your name in the chat box. I'll call upon you in queue, and you can ask Peter a question. So it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Matt. And if I catch my tongue or cat catches my tongue, please do jump in and help uncatify my tongue, although that might not happen. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I view this as a very useful step in what I'm doing in negotiations with various political and business parties right now, because it's emptying my brain onto a page, into a video, and going over some facts that a lot of people are asking about, and some high place folks too. Um, some of which I can't go in. I'm not here to talk about the details of that, and I can't go into the details of that at this stage. But the negotiations are at the highest levels at this stage, which is really exciting. Um, so I'm only talk about myself very, very briefly, and then my intention is to do a bit of a brain dump. It's a little bit unstructured. I'm going to let it flow. Um, what I'll do is I'll sort of do a continent. I'll do a bit of a continental scale, and then I'll go into a bit more focus on region by region, and then maybe we can have some questions by region. But it gets interconnected because we're dealing with a continental network. So one connection deals with another connection. So a little bit about myself. I learned I was a geographer at heart when I was about 12 years old because my father taught me geography by putting out a National Geographic map of Canada and a poster size piece of paper, and he said, draw the map of Canada. And he gave me a pen. 3 hours later, I had drawn the map of Canada, which is actually takes a long time because the coastline is insane. And then I started going, what if we put a railroad here? What if we put a mountain there? Since then, I'm now a registered professional planner and a professional transportation planner. Uh, and I have a bunch of degrees, which actually didn't add a whole lot to my education. I'm sure Matt will get a chuckle at that. And what I'm doing right now, I'll just say my childhood friends are saying you are doing what you were born to do. So that's exciting. So I'm switching over to share screen, and you're going to see what I'm looking at on my computer. Basically, you're not going to see my face very much more at all. And I just share entire screen. There we go. Okay. So probably my biggest contribution to the discourse of the present time is this map. And I'll see if I can take off the ruler, which is using up some space unnecessarily. It's got the stupid bar on top. Rulers, view, ruler. I don't need to see the ruler. There you go. Okay, gives a little bit more space. And we don't need to see that either. Go away. Go away. There we go. Okay, great. Um, So I was living in Nunavut for 10 years, working for various government agencies and actually not accomplishing a whole lot, well, for the most part. A few things, but not as much as 10 years of work should amount to, and that's not my fault. But I was recruited out of Nunavut by a First Nation leader who was then president of Alaska to Alberta Railway Development Corporation, which was based in Edmonton and Vancouver and was looking to build a railway from Fort McKay to Valdez and had just been issued a cross-border permit by President Trump in 2020. My employment was triggered by that issuance of that permit, which was deemed to reduce the risk. At A2A, I accepted, and for the next 9 months, I was thrown into world of rail planning and First Nations liaison. And we started smelling, my team was the best team I've ever worked with directly. And but we started smelling some rotten fish in the ventilators. And after in May or so, 9 months after I started, the chairman was basically caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The Ontario Securities Commission seized all the assets of the corporation. The assets included the cross-border permit, as I mentioned, the engineering, most of which was in Alaska. Alaska is basically ready to go for rail development. The economic forecasts and an agreement with the U.S. Department of Defense for an extension from Fairbanks down to a point closer to the Yukon border, which would save about $3-4 billion on construction costs. And an agreement with Alaska Railroad to use their railway from Fairbanks to Alaska into perpetuity for access to tidewater. These were deemed by a large management company based in Canada as having zero value and refused to put up for sale. There were buyers at the time, and they were not given the opportunity to buy the assets of the corporation and continue. It wasn't even a bidding war. It was these are not for sale. And that has been the status for 2 years. And I'd had some disagreements with the key engineering consultant on some of the details of the routing, and they had proven to not be very open to negotiation. And there's all these different ideas about routes in my head. And as a mental health exercise, I put down some of my ideas that were in my head, down on a map, closed the door, and moved on. And 2 years later, the door knocked. I heard knocking on the door again, and I ended up calling a couple dozen of the First Nations that we had interacted with at A2A Rail, and I said, "Are you really interested in this? Like, is this something I should pursue?" And all of them said yes, but we want to be part of it from before day one. We want to be part of it from now. And that started this map going, which is like I kept on finding all these different routes and going through archives. So this map represents around 2,000 hours of work, which have not been compensated. Somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000, but there's also costs of, getting archival information. The primary sources of the information. So at a high level, this map, if the line is red, that means there is a train or railway there now. If the line is orange, it means there is a track bed there now. There may or may not be rails on it, probably not, but there is or was a track bed there. Usually if a track bed was built, it's not removed, but that in some agricultural areas, they do disappear. If the line is green, that means that an engineer or a surveyor who was probably on horseback sometime in the last 120 years has opened up a map and said, you can put a train here. So someone more qualified than I has said, yes, you can do it. The largest source of information on that is the Railway Atlas at the University of Alberta, which has a few hundred maps that are gathered from Grand Trunk Pacific to Canadian Northern to Central Canada Railway, all sorts of things. I put all those information into one place, and yellow means the gradient is suitable for a railway, but it hasn't been reviewed in detail. And based on my observations, there are major geotechnical issues or challenges that will need to be overcome for this route to be possible. What does this do? Why do we care about rail? doesn't everybody use trucks nowadays? The reason for rail is that it is the most limited mode. Trains do not like turning left or right, and they really don't like going up or down. Think about it. A train a mile long where each individual rail car weighs 250,000 pounds. Think about the amount of energy it takes to move that train up a meter. Now figure out how much energy it takes for that train to go up and over a mountain range. They quickly see why they invest in such long tunnels. And the mechanical wear and tear for keeping that train from careening out of control when it goes back down the other side. So as a rule of thumb, a 1% grade is considered maximum for a class 1 railway. For short haul railways and some feeder lines, you can go steeper than that because you're dealing with smaller trains that are more powerful. But when you think 1% grade, think for every kilometer of distance, the train can go up 10 meters. Second, because trains are so limited, if you can put a train in that corridor, that means any other mode can go there too. It is the definition of a multimodal corridor. Pipeline, highway, telecommunications line, whatever. If this map shows those routes that are suitable for any form of mode in northern and western Canada. Is this model complete? Yes and no. For the Arctic regions, it is not complete because the Arctic regions tend to be quite flat. And there's your main limiting factor is actually your frost content in the permafrost. Permafrost comes in, it can be considered in terms of how much frost content is in the ground. If you're dealing with 30, 40, 50%, you're basically building infrastructure on ice. And no matter what you do, you have to keep that ice frozen. In other cases, you're dealing with rocky outcrops, and the frost content may be 2%, 5%. Anyway, the rock doesn't move from year to year. So that actually is quite easy to build on. You're more blasting out the rock than actually, or putting some gravel on top of the rock to level it than doing anything else. It's actually pretty easy to build on. So I could cover everything in Nunavut with lines because there's not a lot of mountains out there on mainland Nunavut, but I'm not going to do that. Once you get into the Cordilleran regions and the prairies, yeah, you get really limited on where you can go. So with that, I'll start diving into the geography of North America and how this affects our network. So in Alaska, I'm just going to start with describing the mountains, then I'll describe the rivers. Alaska is a land of very tall mountains, and there is the Alaska Range running an arc across the center of the state, but there's one crack through it, and that's where the existing Alaska Railway goes through, which is near Denali, which is ironically one of the highest mountain in North America. And just so happens that's where the crack is that you can get a train through. There's these other mountains like St. Elias and Wrangell. You will never ever get a train through them. This A2A proposal to go down to Valdez, for example, involved the train going up about 5,000 feet, going through a 3 kilometer tunnel at the top of the pass where the glaciers are, and then having to do the world's biggest switchback. It goes all the way out 10, 16 kilometers and all the way back at 2% odd grade. Is very, very difficult. This range continues down to Stewart, British Columbia. The reason the Alaska Panhandle is where it is that's more or less where that range of mountains, which then melds into the coast mountains, has a break in it. That's what keeps the coast separated from inland, and why the Russians moved down the coast the way they did and sort of stopped where they did. They stopped where they were no longer protected from the inland by extremely high mountains. There are rivers moving through these mountains, but rivers come in all sizes and shapes, and a lot of alpine rivers are very difficult to build along. They have extremely high gravel content, meaning where the river goes back and forth very considerably. They also are prone to extreme flood events, meaning the river is basically, the moment you put your track in, the river is trying to eat it. Then inland, of course, we have a series of ranges through central Yukon and British Columbia, but the main one is the line running from which we associate with the Rocky Mountains, which extends northward into the Mackenzie Mountains. And this forms another wall. Um, but the wall is not continuous all the way through. There are some places you can get through and some places you can, but you have to be basically building a 20-kilometer tunnel. The key point is if you're getting to Alaska, for example, through British Columbia, you're going to go through Dease Lake. You're going to go through Dease Lake because there's this lovely U-shaped valley. U-shaped valleys are formed by glaciers. Um, they form a broad, wide valley, and the glaciers tend to smooth things out and often create a 1% to 2% grade. So they're actually kind of really good for getting trains. So in British Columbia, you kind of want to go parallel to the coast. So in British Columbia, you're going to be going through Dease Lake. It's basically that simple. I was going to talk about mines first. So I'll summarize the distribution of, I'm already going into routing. To summarize the distribution of resources, there's a few hotspots that everybody should know about. One is Golden Triangle in British Columbia. That's at Stewart and north up to almost to Dease Lake. There's 3 or 4 heavy ore deposits in here, which are considered mineable, and about 15 or 20 rare earths. Heavy ores are things like iron or copper, where the miner has to is things are counted in tons or tons of tons, often 1 million tons a year or 20 million tons a year. They need to get the ore out. They'll often try to pre-process on site to concentrate the ore and get some of the waste rock out of the way so they're not shipping as much waste out. But their calculations also depend on what infrastructure is available. If a train is available, the cost of the mine goes down. The cost of shipping ore goes down because trains, you've got 2 conductors that can carry 150 loads of ore versus a truck. You've got one driver can handle a single load. The heavy ores, if you build a railway into a mining area, the numbers will indicate less concentration, which also has positive effects on the environment because when you do pre-concentration at the mine site in a remote area, there's greater risk of environmental contamination versus you just get the ore out less concentrated. So that's one of our hotspots. Second hotspot, Mackenzie Mountains. Most people don't know about the wealth of the Mackenzie Mountains. A lot of people have heard about the Golden Triangle. Mackenzie Mountains. Cantong was, to my knowledge, the largest producer of tungsten in the West for 20 or 30 years. Tungsten is a hardener in alloys. You cannot make a bullet without tungsten. Selwyn, a Chinese-owned deposit of mainly copper and zinc, which would generate 1 million tons a year for 20 years were it opened. McMillan Pass, mainly a zinc deposit, again around 1 million tons a year. Next to it is Mactung, which is, as far as I know, the current largest tungsten deposit in the West. It may not be the biggest in the West, but it's up there. Mactung is an interesting story. The same company owns Mactung and McMillan Pass, and Gaina for that matter. You guys can see my cursor. It's basically my pointer. Okay. They were sitting on this deposit for years, and then the U.S. Department of Defense, now the U.S. Department of War, walked up to them and said, "Here's 20 million bucks," or some amount, that number. I'm not sure exact amount, but it was a significant asset. Here's 20 million bucks. Figure out how you get the tungsten out to us. We need the tungsten. About 5 minutes later, the government of Canada, which had been doing nothing for like 10 years or 20 years, said, "Okay, we'll match that amount from the US government, but we'll add 50 bucks to it." I'm giving hyperbole. But they ended up with $35 million to figure out how to get how they're going to do the detailed engineering on roads, not rail, to get a road to Mactung so they could get the tungsten out. So that tells you some of the strategic value here. What nobody has heard about is Crest. Crest is arguably a world-changing deposit. 16 billion tons. That's billion with a B, tons of iron ore grading 50 to 65%. 2/3 in Yukon and 1/3 in Northwest Territories. An extremely remote location, very hard to access, but it's still 16 billion tons. That the existence of crust is why you see these yellow dots, because I was figuring out how could a railway that's going to Alaska get a spur out to here, because at some point North America will need that access to that iron resource. Now, for those who are familiar with Yukon politics, you will have heard of the Peel Land Use Plan. This is a bit of a, I'm going to be going on a lot of tangents that we're building a network and literally and figuratively. So you'll just have to follow along and we'll answer questions in a few minutes. I'll do a first round of questions. Um, but Yukon is divided into 7 or 8 planning regions. The first planning region that was finished was a North Yukon plan. Long story short, the North Yukon plan was very well done and used a ecological thresholds system, which I won't go into details on how it works. The folks that took over the Peel land use plan, which includes the Peel Basin down here in central eastern Yukon, took that model, but then they jacked the constants so high that they declared something like 93% of this whole planning zone to be non-developable without extirpating every species in the region, which is complete nonsense. And then a very organized political movement occurred in Whitehorse, and it went to courts for 5 years. Plan Yukon, the planners at Plan Yukon were sitting around. I don't know what they were doing for 5 years, but they're all getting their full-time wages. Sounded like a great gig to some folks in my world, but anyway, it passed. It passed, and the First Nations definitely were, the Gwich'in and others were definitely supporting what they were seeing. And the current Peel land use plan does say no development on the crest site, and it does mention that it's one paragraph in that plan. It says crest is a world scale iron ore deposit, but it's so remote that it will never ever be used. So it's okay to zone this area for conservation into perpetuity. So it's one step down from a national park at the present time. But you have to amend the plan technically to get into this. Okay. Another hotspot is the Slave Geological Province, which is in Western Kitikmeot and Northern Northwest Territories. I only have one deposit marked here, which is Izok, which is the biggest one. But there's another one really close to it called Hackett River. And there's another one really close to it called Doris. And there's another one really close to that called Wolfston. And there's another one, it goes on and on and on. It's a hotspot in this area. Includes the Diavik and Acadie diamond mines. And the original concept of a port and road, the idea was build an all-weather road out of gravel from the northern end of Contoito Lake to the coast. The reason at northern end of Contoito Lake is the ice road from Yellowknife follows Contoito Lake and these lake strings and comes down this way, roughly. So the thinking was in the wintertime, you have a 2 to 4 month window where you can drive trucks up from Yellowknife. Okay, so we can get our supplies up, but the ice road is extremely expensive to build and doesn't last very long. And if we're ores, forget it. You're not getting heavy ores by truck out that huge distance because once you're at Yellowknife, what do you do then? Well, you could probably drive it down or you put it on a ferry or a barge and you ship it from Yellowknife down to Hay River, put it on a train, but now you're switching all that ore twice. So instead of doing all that, some folks had said, well, let's build a road from Contoito out to the shoreline, put a port there, and in this wintertime, we can use the road to get the ore to the coast, and we'll stockpile it there. And in the summertime, we can bring in our barges, we can load up the ore, get the ore out, but we can also bring in the supply, mainly diesel and other supplies. We can unload them at the shoreline, and through the winter, we can use that material, truck that material to our various mines. So it's basically an economy of scale. It makes a lot of sense. The original port line was on Barthurst Inlet, and then they changed mode because they found a large deposit sort of near the Hood River. Hood River is another major deposit, but they found another major deposit next to the new major deposit they already knew about near the Hood River. And they switched to this mode. Now they weren't getting anywhere with the Canadian government. So then they said, well, it's a strategic asset. It's a military asset. Okay, this is your Arctic port. We'll put an Arctic port here, and let's extend the road all the way to Yellowknife. When I get into ice, you'll see that's nonsensical, and we'll move on. Another hot spot, iron in northern Baffin Island and Melville Peninsula. A lot of you have heard of Mary River. Mary River is a iron ore deposit. It's two 700-meter high mountains side by side, rating 65% iron. It's as big or bigger than Crest by a little bit. Those two are the world-changing iron ore deposits of Canada. There is an active mine there. And as we get into it, I'll be talking about the endless difficulties of figuring how to get the ore out there, still trucking it out 20 years into the mine operation. There's another major potential deposit of iron ore near Steensby Inlet, which I haven't marked here because it's not well known and I can't find a lot of current data. But when I worked for the government of Nunavut and Indian Northern Affairs Canada, it was showing up high and bright. So that's what I mean is with this data, you got to be cautious. I only put the mines on here that I'm sure about, but there's a whole layer underneath that is in the archives, waiting to be found, right? And I see opportunities for cost sharing. Like if there's a major iron ore deposit seems to be inlet, could they combine a port facilities with Mary River? Probably. But no one's going after Steensby Inlet. There's another one at Tuktoy. There's another one at Roche Bay, a very big one. That's around 1 billion tons. Not, it's like 10 to, about 10% the size of Mary River, but again, it's in those Bs. And then there's Fraser Bay. So there's these mega deposits. These I'm sure about. So this area is an iron hotspot. Moving on, I should also mention rare earths. A lot of people talk about rare earths. Rare earths don't care about trains. Rare earths are, you're getting a gram out of a ton of ore sometimes. Think of gold, right? If you shipped out all the ore when you're looking for a pound of gold, you'll never make money. So rare earths are going to be doing concentrating on site, whether or not you have train access. The one place where train may be useful is if you have a bunch of rare earths close together. If you have a train in, you've got a more economical and safer and more environmentally friendly route to get all that mining equipment in to the rare earth central. Golden Triangle is a great example. Golden Triangle, as I said, has got 15 to 20 mineable rare earth deposits and a whole bunch else just outside it. So it makes sense to get a servicing railway in there that would serve all the mines. Another hotspot. Everyone would sort of ring us fire in Ontario. I'm not going to go into that one. My focus, my study area is mainly Western Canada and Alaska. And also, if you're just where it is, it's not going to be it's not going to be connecting to Hudson Bay. It's going to be connecting to the southern grid through Lake Nipigon area, through existing infrastructure, which will have to be strengthened. Very unlikely because of the marshy nature of the area and the shallow waters of Hudson Bay that you're going to see it open up a new port. It's more economical to go through the south. That's part of the reason I haven't looked into great detail. The other hotspot, everyone knows about this, the oil sands area. There's a west oil sands and an east oil sands. The primary oil sands that everyone's heard of is centered on Firebag, which is near Fort McKay. And it sort of goes from Peerless Trout all the way to Simonson. It actually covers this whole area. And it can be divided into three subsections. One is it divided by the Athabasca River, which comes up north, turns into Fort McMurray, heads north again, and then there's a Clearwater water river coming in as well. The bitumen is concentrated sort of in this area. And then there's another one at Firebag, which is the big one. When we think of the giant, seen from space oil sands mines that are like 10, 20 kilometers across, that is Firebag. And then there's another big one at Anzac. And there's some but they're not all one. They're scattered around them. So the Firebag one does have outliers all the way out into Simonson and Saskatchewan. Another hotspot is in north central Saskatchewan, the Wollaston Supergroup, which no one has heard of. Zinc and copper, heavy load. It's not been explored in great detail because you can't get to it. The nearest railway is Lynn Lake, which is only like 400 or 500 kilometers away, but there is Reindeer Lake in the way. So if you're going to build through this, you're going to have to go around north or south. And Tech, is it Tech? One of the bigger companies is looking seriously at the primary deposit, which is called Janus Lake. There's another iron ore deposit. Hold on. Let me finish the big hotspots. Yeah, those are the big hotspots. Now that doesn't exclude the scatter. There's more isolated deposits, heavy ores, which you need to know about. One is Stony Rapids. There's a lot of iron at Stony Rapids, enough to handle a railway up there by itself. I'm not sure. Pine Point was another isolated one. It's been exhausted out. It's been mined out. Ferguson Lake, near Baker Lake, very large deposit in the hundreds of millions of tons in the middle of nowhere. Okay. There's nothing going with it. They're looking at building a road, but they're going like, how are we going to handle a road for a mine this size? Because we'll have a truck every 30 seconds, 24 hours a day to handle the kind of ore content we're talking about. These are train kind of numbers. When you start talking about a truck every 30 seconds or a truck every 5 minutes or even a truck every 10 minutes, you need to start thinking trains because the dust kick up. The other factor out here is caribou is when you build dirt, even private roads out into the tundra, hunters will get onto them with their ATVs, and not all hunters follow appropriate protocols. And with caribou, migrating caribou, if the first caribou are shot by hunters who don't know what they're doing, the rest of the caribou will stop or turn around, thus interfering with their migration. It's proven remarkably easy to kill out a herd of caribou. You just have to you just have to knock out the first ones, and the others will turn around, or they'll go off in the wrong direction, and then messes up their system. They go into the wrong feeding area or the wrong breeding area, and they end up being extirpated the next winter. Um, so that's another factor to consider. Isolated ones, good to know, is Casino, which has basically been permitted, but it can't figure out how to get all that zinc out. It's right on the Yukon River, but it's sort of sitting there waiting. Um, and I will stop there. Now, I'm going to pause for a break here and a set of questions very, very shortly, but I'm basically going to break this down into three subgroups when we get into this of transportation networking. East, north, and west. So better lines to the north coast and Alaska. Sorry, to the north coast of BC. Sorry, north, which would include Alaska, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and east, which will include Hudson Bay. And just to top it off, we'll finish off with a quick discussion about the Northwest Passage. And I will pause there and take 3 or 4 questions now. If there's anything burning, or if you know I'm going to be going into details, which I will be, then don't ask it now. Wait, but let's stop there.
Okay, I see a question from Monty. Monty, you just have
Oh.
to take yourself off of mute.
All right, all right. Very good presentation. You know, I happen to be a Gandhi dancer for the Union Pacific Railway in the 70s, and then I ended up the chief of logistics for the Army Corps of Engineers in Los Angeles district. So I'm reminded of the proposal for the North American Water and Power Alliance project. That was engineering studies were done by both the Army Corps of Engineers and Parsons Engineering in the early 60s. I was wondering if any of these studies intersect with the studies that you've done insofar as mapping this out.
No, I've never heard of those studies before, and no one at A2A had heard of them either. But I'd be
I
happy to
actually
see
have
them.
a few links to some interesting things on the project Monty's talking about. I'll send them to you as a private separate email. I think you'll enjoy it based on how your mind works. But it's very
Okay.
complementary in its spirit to what you're describing here.
Mhm. But
It's
I will
basically
mention on
it's like
top of
it's
that that
continental water management, pretty much.
okay. Is this about like damming the James Bay? That kind of
Uh,
thinking?
No, well, that magnitude, but it's tapping into the like 5% of the water runoff in the Arctic in mostly Alaska and the Yukon, and then bringing it down into reservoirs and like the Rocky Mountain Trench and down into the broader continent, down to Mexico, frankly. And it involves like 79 dams and a lot of electricity generation along the way. A lot of locks and stuff as well. It's huge.
Understood.
It would have also required extensive transportation networks, railways, and so forth to go up there. So there were feasibility studies done. I'm aware of that, and there was initially approved to move forward with it. But unfortunately, with the assassination of Kennedy, that was
Mhm.
eliminated.
At the present time, I would hazard to say that with the political climate with First Nations, it wouldn't be possible at the present time, that kind of research. The ownership structure we've been looking at is where the First Nations own the corridor network with a government charter. How the details that we worked out, I don't know. That would be part of that'd be what we'd be looking at. Two keywords that you mentioned earlier about where you're coming from may play a very significant role in what we're doing. It's completely up in the negotiation stage right now. I'll just mention that. Um, but we are hoping with Indigenous ownership of the corridors through a double arm's length Indigenous right-of-way management consortium under government charter that we are basically solving economic reconciliation because First Nations were shut out of the initial transportation infrastructure was built across the country and across the continent, and that has contributed to the conditions we're dealing with today. We feel that by integrating them into the ownership of the corridor and the final route finding, and also establishing free trade industrial zones along the different corridors that are built, will will tie them enough into into the DNA of what I'm calling Western Canada 1.0, or sorry, 2.0, that that you basically find a solution to economic reconciliation and through joint ownership that involve all the nations, all the way down to Mexico or even farther. We'll see we'll see a full renaissance and a solution to these longstanding social issues. Now, I've gone another tangent. When I say Western Canada 1.0, that's what I call the two existing railways. There's Winnipeg to Vancouver. That's the Canadian Pacific. That is the model. I just draw a straight line. I draw a triangle. And then Winnipeg to Prince Rupert was the second V. The purpose of the first V was very explicit by the Prime Minister. Keep the Yankees out. Settle along that. Along the CPR, you've got Vancouver, Kamloops, Calgary, Regina. And the second line, keep the Alaskans from coming down. Keep the Yankees out again from the north. Prince Rupert, Prince George, Edmonton, Saskatoon. That is Western Canada 1.0. We're talking about Western Canada 2.0, which involves two new routes. One is the West-East, which is the Overland Northwest Passage, which sometimes I've called the Northwest Passage by rail, but if I'm being strictly talking about multimodal, I need to go Overland Northwest Passage. And the other one is what I'm calling the Athabasca corridors, which go to the north, primarily to Alaska. I say Athabasca because that is a well-known Canadian name, and the First Nations language groups of this whole part of the continent are Athabasca. So it totally makes sense in my mind to call it Athabasca corridors. Sorry, that was a question that turned into a tangent, which turned into subtangent, which turned into another tangent. But that's the way this discussion is going to go because we're talking about network planning, and that's the way it just goes, both practically and geographically. So I'll stop there. Next question.
Yeah, I got a two-part question from Stephen. Stephen asks, are the large tunneling boring machines a viable economic option for creating rail lines in these remote areas such as mountains, lakes, permafrost? That's one question. And based on how you answer, I guess we'll determine how I read his follow-up question.
In some cases, yes. In most cases, no. The Rocky Mountains are primarily a sedimentary structure, which means highly layered. And that also means there's a lot of water infiltrations, and you're dealing with discontinuous permafrost across most of the locations we're looking at. What it means, it's a nightmare down there under the ground. And those tunnels are going to encounter geological formations, guaranteed, that were not expected, that are going to be a pain in the butt to deal with and very expensive. Plus, which we're dealing with some locations, for example, over here, which I might switch to this mode because it's a little bit easier to watch, which is Google Earth. I wasn't able to keep all my prospective detailed work is actually under lock and key right now with some clients as things are being sorted out up high. So I have to describe to you what you can't see, but I can see. It's a little bit awkward, but that's just the state where negotiations are right now. Anyway, if the railway followed, for example, the Alaska Highway through the Muskwa ranges of the Northern Rocky Mountains, right over here, you're surmounted with something. You have to face something almost insurmountable. The elevation over here is about 700. The elevation over here is 1500. Now remember what I said, 10 meters per kilometer? So when you're going from 500 to 1400, that's 900 meters. That means you need 90 kilometers of elevation rise to get up. And then it's the same drop on the other side. But this distance is only about 40 kilometers. So how do you deal with that? Well, you're either making the train do zigzags with either switchback turnarounds or spiral tunnels, or you get the train as high as you can and then you dig through the mountain to a point of similar elevation on the other side. So you try to, but the issue is, it's not like a pass that goes like up, down. It's a pass that goes up, stays high, and then drops again. And that may be 30 kilometers. And it may be 400 meters high. A car can handle that without thinking about it. But what does the train do? Well, if you build a tunnel, you're talking about a 40-kilometer tunnel. Rule of thumb for tunnel building is $1 million a meter. So that's $40 billion right there. The Boring Company, maybe Elon Musk would dispute that. I don't know. Elon Musk hasn't responded to my emails, so I'm not sure. Now, once you get over to the mountains farther west along the coast, you're dealing primarily with igneous form and metamorphic formations, which tend to be a lot harder. They're nicer to have a tunnel in because you know what you're dealing with, but they're also harder rock to drill through. I'll give you an example of a trade-off that we were facing at A2A, and it's right. The A2A route should be showing up here, but it's not. Selkirk First Nation, Selwyn, Valley, Minto, Pelly Crossing. It's near here. There we are. Okay, there we are. Yeah, that's it. Let me try to turn on photo. I'm gonna have to track down photos. Anyway, there's two possible routes through central Yukon. One was coming in along the Pelly River. One was coming in along the Yukon River. I like this route because it got the train. It was a little bit farther, but it got the train away from the primary caribou route, and got the train closer to the major mineral deposits. And I spent a lot of time working on this. Now, here's the thing. You see the river, the Pelly River comes towards the Yukon and suddenly makes a bend to the left and swings around. Why does it do that? This is a lava flow. There's a volcano here that quit erupting sometime around the age of the dinosaurs, but the lava is still here. And this is all lava. It's 100-meter high lava base. So you're coming along the Pelly, the train's coming along, along the river, and I'm like, okay, suddenly I've got this 100-meter high thing in front of me. Remember, I said 100 meters means 10 kilometers up, 10 kilometers down, but I don't want to go up and down because I'm already pretty much at the level I want to be, which is the Yukon River. So what do? I looked at, okay, what is this thing? It's basalt. It's basalt. It's those columnar formations from that when you have slow cooling lava, they form these hexagonal columns. That's what this whole thing is. And I thought, well, what if we trench this thing or tunnel it? Right? It's a pain in the butt, but that's good ballast. Like you can take the broken up lava, and then as you're mining it, you ship it out down the line to Alberta where there's no decent rock, and then you've got something to put underneath your tracks, right? So maybe we should be thinking about something like that. But then there's a lot of unknowns because there's something called acid rock drainage. Acid rock drainage is associated with certain types of primarily igneous rock. What it is there's a certain chemical in the rock, and there's this type of bacteria that likes to eat that chemical. And the poop of this bacteria is highly acidic. And there's been certain locations, like Britannia Bay in British Columbia near Vancouver, where you expose rock and the bacteria colonizes it, and then what comes out is basically vinegar. But it's not vinegar, it's like, rock acid rock drainage. And then it kills everything below it. Because it's nothing can live in a vat of vinegar. Never mind if it's like rock-based, sulfuric-based vinegar. So this is an example. I'm going off way on a tangent with tunneling work. So one thing I was raising my flag with at A2A is like, where are you getting the aggregate for all this? Because in some locations, I'll go to another location so you know what I'm talking about. When you see this, when you see lots of little ponds, that means permafrost. That means super high frost content. That means these lakes can't drain because the water that's frozen underneath the lake and the water can't drain out. That means all the land around it is both saturated with ice and frozen. It's hard for me not to use 4 and 5 letter words here that start with B. It is not friendly. And in some cases, and we're dealing with farther north locations, you cannot avoid them. When you're dealing with this kind of thing, you need to keep that ground frozen no matter what, and you need to have contingencies in case it does freeze. Which means, in reality terms, for example, over here where I was talking about Mary River, where the guy said we're going to put the train right through here because it's flat. They ended up saying, "Oh, we ran the numbers. We were originally thinking $1 billion for 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers because we were thinking, 10 million a kilometer, which is reasonable if you choose your route right. But they had to go to 50 because they chose the wettest area and they went with a 9-meter base. What does a 9-meter base look like? 9 times 3 is basically 30 feet. The train is 30 feet above the plane. That's a 3-story house, 4-story house. Then you need the slopes, 45-degree slopes down, and it has to be stepped down because it's so high. When you run the numbers, that works out to a pyramid of Cheops worth of gravel every 30 to 50 kilometers. Think of that. Pyramid of Cheops, the big thing outside Cairo? That made out of gravel every 30 to 50 kilometers. That's where you end up with these crazy costs. And on top of that, you probably want to put thermosiphons. Thermosiphons are basically like freezers that you stick in the ground and they suck the heat out. They need power, but they keep the ground frozen. So, ideally you want to have both because big heavy trains that are moving at 80 kilometers an hour do not like tracks that wave or go up and down. And if they fall off those tracks, really bad things happen. So the question was about tunnels. I'm doing a really long-winded, but I sometimes do my best when I'm going on one of my monologues. At least people tell me this. I'm not worrying you too much. So the answer is in some cases yes, in most cases no.
Now that's a wonderful approach, and it just shows that you have this is where I see that people have real knowledge or just something that they've memorized from a map. Because there is no simple, easy answer. There's so much nuance and dynamics, but the way you have a familiarity with all of the problems and the challenges is just a breath of fresh air. It's really rare, and yeah, everybody who compliments you is doing the right thing. And I don't know if you want to go on, but I think Stephen's follow-up question actually kind of fits into this thrust. So maybe I'll read Stephen's second question, and then you can go back onto your composition. Stephen writes, could the northern uranium and thorium reserves be leveraged for a northern network of microreactors, SMR, small medium reactors to electrify the north and its economic development? So all that energy. Yeah,
No, they can't. The uranium can come from the north, but the uranium is not the hard part. Getting the uranium cakes out. Yeah, that's its own specialized mining, but it's uranium is considered a rare earth. So you're sifting through. It's not you're not digging out uranium cake and then packing it into a bread can and then carrying it off, right? You have to process the ore to get the uranium out, and it's not a lot. Like these big nuclear plants are running on like, I don't know, not a lot of uranium, something you could basically put in your car. So the big factor is the micro for the small modular reactors. Even if the uranium is coming out of Nunavut, it's being flown down to wherever these reactors are being built. It's being processed into the fuel containers that fit this modular reactor, and that's being flown back. Okay, great. I'll switch back to the other map. And I'm going to talk about British Columbia, North Coast British Columbia first. In some ways, it's the easiest, and it leads naturally to Alaska because there's a lot of shared usage. Um, okay, so background. When Alberta was founded, there were 6 towns, 6 primary centers. 5 of them were chosen to be as close to a mountain pass through the Rockies as you can and still be in good farmland. Those 5 towns are Grand Prairie for the Pine Pass. Number 2 is Edmonton for the Yellowhead Pass. Number 3 is Red Deer for the Howse Pass, and Calgary for the Kicking Horse Pass, and Lethbridge for the Crow's Nest Pass. 3 of these are operational and 1 is semi-operational. So Crow's Nest, we have the Canadian Pacific Union Pacific Shared Sioux Line going through it. The Kicking Horse Pass is the quintessential Canadian Pacific success story of, driving a train through the mountains and then going over Kicking Horse Pass and somehow getting this train down 300 meters through a series of spiral tunnels and these massive engineering works past the slopes of Mount Stephen and down into the flats, and then getting through the Kicking Horse Canyon. Amazing engineering work. Like when I look at the topography of what's gone into getting through the Rockies at this point, I go like, I never would have put this never been on a map. If I made this map 150 years ago, that route would not have been on it because I would have said it's too difficult, too complex. I would have gone through Howse Pass. Which is this crack and ends you up at the same place because it's like 20 times easier. I mean, yeah, it's coming out of Red Deer, but you just follow the Red Deer River, and then you go up Abraham Lake and you go through this pass, which isn't that difficult. And it spits you out at Donald, the settlement of Donald, just north of what is now Golden. And then I would have gone what the original idea was, because they went up and over the Rogers Pass, which again, I think is nuts. Like if you've driven through the Illa Silhouette area, and you see that when you're at the Rogers Pass and you're driving west and you go down that steep slope, trains had to do that. Trains can't. That's not 1% grade. That's like 10% grade. Trains can't do that, but they did it anyway. And you had all these stories of trains being derailed. And besides that, the glacier was coming right down. Was at the foot of the train was going by the foot of the glacier at the time. It's nuts. The largest tunnel on the Canadian Pacific system now goes under Rogers Pass. It's about 21, 22 kilometers long, and it avoids all that. I never would have done that. I would have gone up and around the Columbia Valley, which has now been flooded by the Mica Dam and is now Kinbasket Lake. But I would have gone down this valley along the Columbia, just followed the Columbia, and just eaten the extra 150 kilometers. Because I said better to go 150 kilometers longer than to be losing every second train to some sort of derailment or avalanche or something. Then you have Yellowhead Pass, which is as easy as Crow's Nest Pass. You just drive up to it, you go through it, and it's nothing on the other side. Easy as pie. And that was the thinking behind the Central Canada Railway and the Grand Trunk, which later on were merged into the Canadian National. You can see the Canadian National comes through Jasper and the Yellowhead Pass. Then it comes to the Rocky Mountain Trench and splits, one arm heading down south through Kamloops to Vancouver, the other one heading northwest to Prince George and eventually to Prince Rupert. And then you had Pine Pass, which was also considered by both the Grand Trunk and the Central Canada Railway, which is just north of Kennedy here. The Pine Pass Railway is not super complex. And it was never the intention of the builders that it was going to be an isolated rail spur. Uh, they did build a bridge over the Pooskoopi River at this location, and then they never maintained it. And then this became too expensive to replace, and they couldn't be bothered to fix it. So this route deactivated. They also started building a route from Dawson Creek to Rycroft in Alberta as a secondary connection. They started it, and then they stopped. They never actually built it, but all the engineering's there. So this route would have gone through Pine Pass and then either gone through Grand Prairie or through Rycroft, and now CN. They had this working, and now CN has shut down this component. Not the whole component, just the part that crosses the Smoky Canyon. Because the Smoky Canyon, the train has to go down 150 meters and then back up 150 meters. Beautiful curves, all set out, but not that great for a Class 1 railways. Class 1 railways, as I said, do not like going down, do not like turning left or right. They really don't like going up or down. So when you're doing switchbacks down into canyons and then back up again, they tend to be the first on the chopping block with the modern CN hyper-profit model. What still exists is the railway going from Grand Prairie through Grand Cache down to Hinton. And that was set up primarily as a coal railway because Grand Cache was the coal center, something shut down by the NDP. And today, if you wanted to get a train into Grand Prairie, you're taking this route. There's no other way. But under the Grand Trunk Pacific line, their primary route out of Edmonton to Grand Prairie was to go this way. And that still exists. They cross the Athabasca here. The Athabasca does not like being crossed by trains. There's only 5 places really you can cross the Athabasca River by train without spending $1 billion on a bridge. That's one of them. The other ones, so you know, is at Smith, Alberta, which there's an existing slow speed spur to what used to go to Hay River, but now only goes to Enterprise just across the border of NWT. There was one at Athabasca, town of Athabasca. They actually never crossed the river, but you could have. You could have crossed the river here and then gone up sort of this way. There's some glacial striations running north-south. The Pelican Mountains don't really show up on anybody's radar, and you can just drive up and over them and not notice them, but they're actually really suck for real because they go up like 500-600 meters and then go back down again. So from a distance, you barely see the range, and it's all forested, so you barely notice that they're there. But for a train, oh yeah, forget it. But there is a series of north-south lining these glacial lines, and they're carved into the bedrock running through here. So you can, from Athabasca, technically curve up and go up this way. I used to have this on my maps, but I took it off. I'm thinking about putting it back on, but anyway, that's another one. And then the last easy one is at Fort McKay, north of Fort McKay, below the canyon and before the swamps start. That's another thing. Everything around Lake Athabasca is swamps. This is all swamp. Swamps with ice. What did I say about swamps with ice earlier? Forget it. You're just going to be spending crazy money. Now, there has been discussion about a Fort McMurray to Fort McKay line, which involved getting the trains down to the river. I might zoom in on this one here because it keeps on coming up in conversation. Okay, so the current CNR McMurray Spur terminates. Make sure I'm on 3 times zoom, and now I'm going to blast this thing sideways. Everything comes in a lot clearer when you come in with an oblique angle and you can see the slopes you're dealing with. Okay, there's your CNR coming in. There's your McMurray Airport. This is your McMurray ski resort. That's sort of a hint. Okay, there's an elevation change here. What's the elevation at the top? 380 meters, and the elevation at the bottom, 255. So 150 meters drop. Okay, So it's a kiddie ski resort for training. Now, how do you get a train down 150 meters? You need 15 kilometers. What does 15 kilometers look like? Well, the station is here because there's this creek here called the Sapere Creek. The Sapere Creek runs at a 2.5% grade. How do I know it's there? Because I found it in the 1920s archives with a little note saying you need to add an extra locomotive to get up and down this thing. Sapere Creek. So they were thinking that the train would follow the bottom of the Sapere Creek Valley and then spit out in the Clearwater Valley over here. If you want to maintain a 1% grade, you need to go along the sides and side cut. But this is mainly silt with a bit of ice. It sucks. So if you're going to be side cutting through here, your track, you've got to be putting piles into the ground and putting a concrete level across. You're basically building a bridge that's on the ground. Does that make sense? It's a bridge, but the piles are actually in the ground to do that. And then if you do your 2.5% grade, as I said, for the big class ones, not great. If you do 1% grade, you spits you out at Waterways neighborhood. And then either way, you have to get through from this end of Fort McMurray to that end of Fort McMurray. You could either follow the freeway, or you could go down Franklin Avenue, which takes you right through the middle of downtown, or you can go along the river, in which case all of the jogging tracks and recreation centers and golf courses are cut off from the river. Then you'd probably have to cross the Athabasca here. I'm going on a very long tangent, but I'm going to switch back. Anyway, the cost of getting from McMurray to McKay is going to be at least $2 billion. That's both my estimate and an estimate of an engineer before me. And it's going to be severely disruptive to the residents of Fort McMurray. Okay, now switching back to the other map. I was talking about the access to the coast. Okay. Other things worth knowing about is the Chilcotin War. Way back when, I think it was Butte Inlet, some rich guy said, instead of Vancouver, we're going to build another port at Butte Inlet. The issue with all these fjords in British Columbia for port facilities is they don't give you a lot of space. Because remember I told you about the glacial U valleys? Glaciers are coming down these valleys. They're carving out this gap through the mountains, and then they're following the fjords. So they're actually going below sea level and pushing through. Okay. That's what a fjord is when the glacier retreats, the parts that were below sea level flood. But that means there's super steep side on either side, and you have a flat space at the end of the fjord, but the flat space is only the width of what the glacier was, which is usually just a few miles. That's not a lot of space for a port. Anyway, he decided Butte Inlet was a great place to put a port because along most of the British Columbia coast, if you go up the fjord, that U-shaped valley will go up a little way, and then it does this vertical thing. Bella Coola is a great example. If you've driven into Bella Coola, you're up in the interior plateau, you go through Anaheim Lake, you're up at like 1,200, 1,300 meter elevation, and then you get to the edge of the coast mountains, which are right on the coast, and that road drops 900 meters, like right now. Not friendly to rail. So anyway, he looked at this and he started building this railway badly, and he managed to cause the Chilcotin to have a full-on revolt. And the story, Matt probably knows more about this than I do because Matt's the history buff. But the long story is some of the Chilcotin leaders killed 5 or 6 of the builders of this railway. And then there was a debate at their trial whether they should be tried under a military court or under a civilian court, because under a military court, they had not agreed and they had not signed a treaty and they had not agreed to this, and someone's building through their land. And would this be considered an act of invasion, which should be consistent with a fatal response in some circumstances, or was it part of the crown, in which case this was a civilian murder and should be treated as such? The court decided on the latter, and the men were hung. But to this day, it's a pain for people to want to build through the Chilcotin because of the politics and the memory of the people there. There's another route near Mount Waddington, which is a similar story. Nothing was ever built there, but I sort of look at this one a little bit blissfully because it's so good for tourism. It's right next to Mount Waddington, which is the highest mountain in British Columbia. They're on either side of Mount Waddington. Either of these would be great for tourism. And then running through the Chilcotin Plateau and seeing the mountains there, and the cattle ranches, and grizzly bears. It'd be great tourism routes. This, but major haul for heavy haul freight, no. Um, I guess also worth mentioning here is the Caribou Line, which connects Prince George to North Vancouver, was built by BC Rail. Then the rail assets were sold to CN, but the British Columbia government maintains control of the right-of-way. CN Rail, since they switched to their hyper-profit model, has not been able to make this line make money, although it was profitable before CN Rail in the 1970s. So considering populations and economies are bigger, I don't really blame the rail. I kind of blame the rail company. But anyway, CN 3 weeks ago applied to shut down pretty much the whole thing from Williams Lake all the way to Squamish. Tear it up, tear out the iron rail, 400 miles, shut it down. But this thing serves a strong purpose. Here's your, I'll switch over to here again. Turn up north, up, right again. And we'll go to the Fraser Canyon. I'm going on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm sort of setting the context for the BC coast. Both the CPR and the CNR, their primary routes go through Fraser Canyon side by side. They have a sharing agreement, so the trains go down one side and they come back the other. They stop competing because there's just way too much traffic for, CN to have trains going either direction with primarily one track and a couple of switchbacks. This is the one place the two railways get along really, really good. Now, when the CPR was built, which is the green line, it switched sides at this location because it was easier to build on the east side. I'm just south of Lytton, by the way. Lytton is right up here. Lytton is that little town that burnt to the ground about 4 years ago, 3, 4 years ago. So the CPR comes along to switch sides. So when the CN came along, they had to build on the other side of the canyon, and they had to switch sides because the CPP was already on this side. So what you've got is two rail bridges within a mile of each other. Make sense? Okay. If you give me one stick of dynamite, and I am so inclined, and I put it right on that X where the two railways cross, all rail access to the Fort of Vancouver will be shut down for a week. If you give me two sticks of dynamite, and I am so inclined, and I put one stick on this bridge and one stick on this bridge, I will shut down all rail access to the Port of Vancouver for a year. Those in Vancouver may say, so what? The Port of Vancouver is not that big a part of the economy, is it? Yes, it is. It is. And I've brought this up at some conferences, and awareness of this strategic threat is increasing rapidly. I'll put it that way. But Western Canada 1.0 was the design had a backup plan. Let's build a connector from Ashcroft to Clinton. It's only 60 kilometers. It's not the easiest thing in the world because Ashcroft is at 400 meters and Clinton is at 1,100. No, it's about 1,000. It's about 1,000. Yeah, 900. Okay, so it needs to go up 500 meters and it's 60 kilometers. So somehow you have to get a 1% grade. This route. You know what? That's in the realm of not crazy. That's in the realm of not crazy. It was never built. All the engineering was done in the 1970s. It was never built. And the idea was if you have a Fraser Canyon disaster or a major flood in Abbotsford, and if you live in British Columbia, you know about the Nooksack floods that occurred 3 or 4 years ago when Vancouver was basically an island connected to Canada by air. Or you could take a drive along the Sea to Sky through Whistler. That was it. Vancouver was an island for about 2 weeks. Trains could switch, go up to Clinton, and then they could follow this route down through Whistler into West Vancouver, drive all the Karens of West Vancouver completely crazy because the train goes right along Caulfield and right past Ambleside. The track is right there. They'd be moving at 20, 30 kilometers. Just imagine, the the multimillionaire ladies with driving their Porsches with their little poodles and those little fancy bubbled carry cases. Holy cow! But you have a backup. You've got a subsidiary plan. Or besides, I mean, this railway was built effectively to serve the logging industry and some mining interests as well. Or you can head north, and that would double. So you'd have trains coming up north from the CN line to Tetjon Cache, Valemount, which is near Yellowhead, or coming up this way and combining at Prince Rupert. And that's a long way from Prince Rupert to Prince Rupert to Prince George, but it is a high class railway, and there's good reasons why Prince Rupert was selected as the northern terminus of the Canadian National Railway. And I will tell you now. The reason is because several reasons. This is the railway, the red line coming, the CNR coming in from the river. So there's a direct, they were able to follow a not so steep route. The river follows a U-shaped valley, yes, but the river has smoothed it out. So the track is not on like a 60-degree slope falling into the water. It's on a more mellow slope, side cutting, and it's able to get to this place, which by coastal British Columbia standards is flat. When I say coastal British Columbia standards, think of the city of Vancouver. You know, it's still hilly, but it's not a 45, 80, or 70-degree slope plowing into the water. And they said, okay, we have space here. They put the town here, the railway in here. The railway originally extended all the way here. Charles Hayes, and Matt can probably fill in a whole lot here. Charles Hayes was the owner of the CNR at the time with Prince Rupert, said he's thinking, we're going to extend this railway, build a bridge here, build it along here. We're going to go all the way up and around, and then we're going to go along to Metlakatla, and we're going to build over to Digby Island, and we're going to build a metropolis that surrounds this harbor. This is a very deep harbor. It doesn't look deep, but it's deep. You can put berths. You can get ocean vessels into here. Like it's even deep through here, which really surprised me when I was looking up. Like this is like 100 feet deep, this little nook here. So this can be poured all the way around here. You can make it equal in size, 200 million tons a year. Vancouver's around 250 million tons a year. Prince Rupert can handle the same. It was chosen because it has this tremendous port capacity. But when he went down with the Titanic, no, look, I mean, when I saw that CN Rail, this little gray line means it was used to be, I was like, seriously? You shut down that line? CNR, you shut down that bit. That was your connection over here. The city of Prince Rupert is zoned this area for harbor, but no one can get to it because this is shut down. Okay, you can build a bridge with the Yellowhead, but it's like, really? How are you that short-sighted? Sorry, I'm going. So what I'm looking at is it's only 500 meters from this point to this point. So I wonder, should this location have one of those lifting rail bridge things, you know, where where a portion of the track lifts up so that ocean vessels can get through. And this is like 300 feet deep through here. And then you can do a connection here. And even if you fill up all this and you've got 150 million tons a year, you still have all that. This is all, again, this is all First Nations property, by the way, all the way up to Lax Kw'alaams. This is called Port Simpson way. It used to be called Port Simpson all the way. Almost all of this is deep water harbors. And they're not as sheltered as Prince Rupert Harbor. But look, you've got the Dundas Islands, 10 miles offshore. They are breaking most of the major oceanic waves. And then you have the Queen Charlotte's. So it's not full exposure. You can use this. You might have to do some dikes and things, but you can do a lot of additional growth over here. So the fact that over 100 years since Charles Hayes died tragically, and this vision has no steps have been made towards achieving this Prince Rupert vision is very disheartening to me about what Canadian culture is when I look at the map of Prince Rupert, and that's why. Now I can't. While I'm talking about North Coast, I might as well show you the other options here. We've got Stewart, this classic fjord-based port. The Alaska Highway, Alaska borders coming through, which makes it a little bit awkward. It's accessible by road. You can get a train in here, and it is actually closer to the CN main line than Prince Rupert, believe it or not. but obviously not a lot. And there's some places along here, if you really stretch it and really willing to spend crazy amounts of money on rail access, you could sort of see small ports. But you compare the scale of the potential port facilities to what exists at Prince Rupert, and it just doesn't compute. This was selected as a major port facility. The Navy considers it to be primarily the military assets of the Canadian West Coast. There should be a metropolis here, and there should be bridges to these harbors. And of course, you're probably thinking about Kitimat. Kitimat is another glacial fjord style. It's a bit wider than most others, so it's able to have a couple of industrial piers here. And it's sort of become the choice for pipelines to terminate, if at all possible. It's got a nice wide, deep fjord. It's very easy to navigate, quite sheltered, and it's closer. It's closer in. You see, like if you want to get a container, you've got to go to Prince Rupert, and it's quite a bit farther out, whereas Kitimat is right here. But you can't put a container per port at Kitimat with any ease. So let's switch back to our options down the road. So looking at the future. So CNCP share the Fraser Canyon. CN owns basically everything north. And they have been providing not a great service to rural clients, but they have expanded, to their credit, the Prince Rupert facility at Port Edward, but they still, as far as I know, have no plans, and I've asked about any sort of major expansion. The other asset we need to know about is the Tumbler Ridge tunnels. There are tunnels, rail tunnels, right here that go a mile underneath the mountain. So you can get from Anzac, British Columbia to Tumbler Ridge very easy. The tunnels could be deepened and they could handle container traffic. So what I see, summarizing it up in the medium term, is there is definitely a case to consider in the medium term for a fourth Alberta BC connection utilizing the Pine Pass or the Tumbler Ridge tunnels. The Pine Pass route can come through this direction, either Grand Prairie or Rycroft. I'm going to say Grand Prairie. I don't see the Smoky River connection reactivating, but I do see either coming through Grand Prairie through rebuilding this rail bridge, or um, building what was already designed as 100 kilometers from Dawson Creek to Rycroft into Grand Prairie, and then I'll show you what this looks like. This little very remote area on the satellite, and you'll see it right away. Okay. So here's your industrial railway. It's just basically serving oil and forestry interests at the present time, but the local counties are looking at this would be a great place for heavy industry. Yeah, it would. It'd be a great place for heavy industry. It's remote. There's trees. There's gravel. There's water. There's not a lot of people around it, but there's enough people to run a factory. So the counties in this area looking at how do we utilize these assets for heavy industry, which increase our tax base. But anyway, so there's your crossing over the Athabasca, and then the train continues up to this random, you know, gas to rail power plant thing with a cool little rail U-turn thing right at the terminus, right? And that's where it stops. Now, one day I was poking along, and this was before I found my abandoned railways layer, which a colleague gave to me, which I'm eternally thankful to him. And I'm looking closely at the landscape, and I see the telltale sign of a spur that isn't there anymore. When you see um, these long thin lines through the forest, and they're not wide enough for a road, and they have a very gentle gradient, you're like, that was a railway. You can tell right off the bat. So I followed it to its terminus. It's mapped now, but I followed terminus. I'm like, I'm all the way out here. And I'm looking at this. So I'm over here. And then I look, there's the Grand Cache Railway. Hold on. So I'm poking along, and then I'm like, what elevation is this? 980 meters. What elevation is this? 500, 860 meters. These 2 points are 60 meters different elevation gain, and that's about 50 miles as the crow flies. Can I connect these two somehow? And I poked around, and yeah, it looks a little bit of a wavy line, but yeah, you can follow the contours and connect these two lines. Getting back over here, I think that is the future Edmonton to Grand Prairie Industrial Railway. Right, that little yellow line. Now, the pipeline proposal, Northern Gateway, it bypasses Grand Prairie by going this way. It might be okay for a railway too. Grand Prairie obviously would rather the railway to go through, except for the ammonium hydrate thing. Grand Prairie's got a lot of ammonium hydrate to sell. And the thing, you can't put it in a pipeline because if there's a spill, it like kills everything. And if there's a train derailment, it also kills everything. But if the train is just moving along at 20 kilometers an hour and it falls off, maybe one car will rupture, but you still can't run it through a town because it still kills everybody. So, yeah, that's a topic for another day. And there's also there's fracking sand. There's a major fracking sand deposit near Fox Creek. Alberta buys its fracking sand from Texas because this railway doesn't exist. There are stories that come out of the woodwork like this. We're importing fracking sand from Oklahoma and Texas, trucking it all the way to Grand Prairie for fracking gas. And there's a fracking sand deposit just down the road, but we don't have the infrastructure to carry it. There's more to that story. I know. I just learned that recently. Okay. So anyway, you can use the tunnels or the pass or both. Getting from Beaver Lodge into Tumbler Ridge is actually for train a bit of a it's a British Columbia nightmare of hills and hullocks, and it can be done, but this is my first guess at a route. And gets you in. Okay, this is all sand lines, as I said. Now the Grand Trunk Pacific had all the engineering diagrams done for Kennedy to Burns Lake as a shortcut to Pine Pass from Prince Rupert. That may be viable. So that's my medium-term plan. The long-term plan would be if you do choose Pine Pass, and this is becoming your fourth major crossing. Remember the other three, Crow's Nest, Kicking Horse, and Yellowhead, which are all pretty full, and you turn Pine Pass into your fourth, and 30, 40 years down the road, when it becomes full, I would consider doing the shortcut. And that takes a lot of the traffic out of Prince George, because Prince George, there's some switching capacity, but they'd be running into limitations. And this is in here. I don't think it's a viable route. It was surveyed by Grand Trunk Pacific like 120 years ago as an alternative, as a shorter version of going through Kitwanga, whatever. Now I'll talk about the St. James connection because that one's also interesting. So Premier Wacky Bennett, W.C. Bennett, had an existing rail spur on BC Rail to Fort St. James from north of Prince George. He then said, build it to Dease Lake. Okay, so they did. That's what that orange dotted line is. Goes all the way up here. The rail bed terminates 5 miles south of Dease Lake. It's all done. It's fixed. The bridges are still there. I wouldn't use the bridges because no one's maintained them for 50 years, but the bridges are all there. Now, give me an example. Look at this bridge. This is the Dease Lake line. Remember, I've had to take off my work on routing on this stuff because the details are in our level discussion at this point. But the abandoned rails is public information. Here's the Dease Lake. Here is the Dease rail bridge, right there. You can still see it on satellite. It's about 700 meters long. Still sitting there. Never been used. 50 years. So I'll switch back to this one. Grand Trunk Pacific had looked at Stewart as its primary port, and they settled on Prince Rupert. They had looked at Stewart. They had looked at getting a railway out of Stewart, but then they were like, "Well, how do we connect west?" And they had pioneered a route through the Nass, the Slamgish, the Sistut, and the Stikine rivers. I can't believe I remembered all those. It's the most weird mix. Coming into a place called Minaret, going up to Mosque. Don't ask me why there's Muslim names in the middle of central British Columbia. I have no idea. Go past the Chemist deposit, which is one of those really big but not astronomically enormous deposits in the middle of nowhere, British Columbia. Coming out at Fort Ware, which is still a settlement. Coming down the Peace River, and then through the Peace Pass and out that way. W.A.C. Bennett said, we're going to build the dam here, and then he flooded all this. I get frustrated a bit because I understand the need for power. But the Rocky Mountain Trench, which runs all the way the full length of British Columbia, is so awesome for transportation, or used to be before they flooded the Kinbasket Lake and the Williston Lake, which are each like 200 miles long. So that's why you see this green line suddenly becomes yellow, because I'm not going on an engineered route now. I'm going on a slope above the lake to get out. And I have to bypass the dam because there's no train going past that dam because it's enormous and getting down into Kennedy and Mackenzie, British Columbia. Anyway, um, the alternative still stands. This rail was laid as far north as Bulkley House. It is a possibility to go up to Minaret, extend it, and then pioneer this route. It is doable. It's mainly, your typical British Columbia Valley construction. There's a couple of places that are a bit tricky, but it can be done. So those are your options for the North Coast. And I know I'm already at an hour and a half. So we're going to have to see if we want to pick up the pace, because I haven't even touched the North or Hudson Bay yet, or the ice conditions. But I will open up for questions now.
Yeah, personally, I would say go ahead. You have carte blanche. I think getting this all in one location is a really great idea and high value. So yeah, good. Take as much time as you need. And that being said, if anybody has a question, now's the time to launch it at Peter.
Going, going,
Oh wait,
gone.
wait,
Okay.
wait, wait! I just
Oh, we have one.
noticed that there was
Are we
something
taken?
in the chat. Hold on 1 second. I'm just having trouble. No, it can wait till later. It's fine.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. I'm going to switch into Alaska. Remember I said earlier in my talk that if you're going through British Columbia, you're going to go through Dease Lake. That's why. Um, this route is possible. That's following Highway 37 through the Golden Triangle. There is a group looking at a short haul line from Stewart up into the Golden Triangle to service the mining industries, primarily the rare earths mining equipment, but also KSM, which is a heavy ore, and Galore, which is a heavy ore, and Iskut, which is a heavy ore, and Red Chris, which is a heavy ore. There's a lot of stuff in here. Um, so if you're servicing that, could we just extend it so that it, does a little sidekick over to it Iskut over to the Dease Lake line? Okay, that's option one. Or you can rebuild W.C. Bennett's line and go up to Dease Lake again. I've already told you why this line is not really on the cards, and I've already told you the tunneling costs we're dealing with if we're getting through the Alaska Highway route through the Muskwa Ranges, and the tremendous cost there. So really, I don't really even consider this stuff from Fort Nelson in as being viable anymore, and that took a long time to get to that point, but I just don't see it happening. If anything, I see if the Alaska route comes through this way, that you could connect the Fort Nelson line to Zama City, because this is basically flat. There's permafrost here, but it's discontinuous permafrost and it's flat. I mean, it looks long, but if you got your system down, whatever, it's not that hard. So once you're Dease Lake, you got two options. You can go basically north through the Stickeen Plateau. You've got to wiggle around to get around a couple of mountains over here, but this was looked at 100 years ago. Or you can go follow the Highway 37 corridor up to Watson Lake. Either route is going to cost you $3 to $5 billion, just Dease Lake to Teslin or Dease Lake to Watson Lake. That's the kind of cost you're dealing with so do that for scale. I don't see a point in going to Watson Lake, because you're going to Watson Lake and then you're making a sharp left turn and you're going back to Teslin anyway at another cost of $4 billion. So it makes a lot more sense to just go through the Stickeen Plateau. Every environmentalist on the west coast of North America will freak. This is wild. It is chock-a-block full of grizzlies and caribou and elk and moose, and there's nobody up there, and it's empty, and then you're putting an industrial railway right through the middle of it. Even if the railway doesn't stop, and it stopped, and it does that Norwegian thing of issuing the wolf call sounds that scares away all the predators, or the prey animals, and it doesn't kill anything. It's still I think back to the when the Tachincini El Sec Park was set up. BC, there's a copper deposit in here of astronomical size that went through the environmental assessment, and was ready to go to production. And the outcry of building in here was so great that the government of British Columbia bought them out, like paid them the value of their ore to, and then turned it into a park. Like multiple billions of dollars. It was like I look at Stikine and I think of that and I'm like, this is not going to happen. But for thoroughness, we'll continue. You get into Teslin, you can follow the Alaska Highway. It's not particularly technically challenging. Get into Whitehorse. Skagway. People wonder about Skagway. Skagway used to go from Skagway to Whitehorse. It only goes to Carcross now, but that rail route is when you're flying to Whitehorse, you can see it plain as day. You can see the rail bed. This is a narrow gauge. Narrow gauge are designed for smaller trains that can go on steeper slopes and do sharper curves. You see the line is kind of wiggly back and forth. That's because to get up the Skagway route, I'll switch over to Google Earth here. The Skagway route has to do what I call the side valley switchback. I'm not sure if that's a technical engineering term. That's just what I call it. It's when two glacial valleys run into each other. There we go. It's the white line. When two glacial valleys run into each other, you get a higher one and a lower one, but they're both usually pretty wide. So to reduce the grade, the train will turn up a valley, go up it a bit, make a U-turn, and then come up the side of that valley, and that reduces your overall grade. And that's what they do twice. There's 1, 2. That's how they got a train up the White Pass and why they use the White Pass instead of the Chinook Trail for the train, because Chinook Trail doesn't have any. It's got this thing, but yeah, that goes all the way down. It wouldn't be useful to you unless you put a bridge that's like 800 meters above the valley bottom over here, which is not going to happen. I mean, I'm going on a tangent here. Okay. So anyway, it's not suitable for heavy haul, is what I'm trying to get at. It would be suitable for pipeline. So it would be suitable for some ore. So the government of Yukon has invested in a port facility at Skagway for the export of ore. And they're thinking about Casino and they're thinking about McMillan Pass when they do that. But they're thinking of trucking it through the canal road so that the trucks would be starting at McMillan Pass. They would be driving, this is basic canal, up and over and down. Every single load would drive that far. That's 1,500-ish kilometers. And Casino, there's a highway fairly close to there, but they'd have to drive about 150 kilometers to connect with the highway. Then they'd drive all the way down again. So that's what the government of Yukon has bid on, is a port at Skagway. Now, once you're there, not super technical to get into Alaska. The part I'm actually most worried about is right here. There's a little settlement called Burwash Landing, which you have your quintessential mountain coming into the lake at a 45-degree angle, landslides, gravel stuff going on. That's where the Alaska Highway goes through. You can't really go on the other side because it's just as bad, only worse, and you have to go up the arm of Kluane or build a bridge. But what worries me more is it goes through 1 mile of national park. And I'm more worried about what Parks Canada would do to a train trying to go through 1 mile of a national park than going through 5 miles of steep slighted eroding slope going into the town is called Burwash. I mean, that tells you something what's going on over here. I worked for Parks Canada and I quit after 5 months because I saw what they did. It's a quick sidebar, but it gives you just how terrifying it is. Marmot Ski Resort at Jasper. They had two 40-year-old ski lifts. The double chairs, the wooden ones that took. You get off, you get on the next one, took. Well, they were 40 or 50 years old, and the pillars were rusting. So the ski resort said to the park, "We want to take out both ski lifts. We'll use the foundations, and we'll put on pillars at the same locations, and we'll put on a 4-person high-speed quad. Same thing, no change, but it's safer because we're worried about these existing chairs are going to fall down." It took Parks Canada 1 FTE to process the application permit, 1 full-time equivalent of a senior staff member. That's $140,000 a year total in. just process their end. And the amount of data they wanted on environmental this and environmental that, I'm looking at it in 2 seconds. I'm going like, this isn't even a development permit. This is freaking maintenance. You're replacing an old ski lift tower that's 50 years old and about to fall down with a new ski tower and using the same foundation. The only way you're causing an environmental issue is you take a bottle of arsenic and you pour it on the ground deliberately. It was ridiculous. Um, so when I think about building a new railway through a mile of Nikolani National Park, I get the jitters. Um, so then you could come up the Alaska Highway, meet at Tok. Let's talk about Tok. Tok is it's a natural meeting point in Alaska. It's where there's a couple of big deposits, the Delta deposit and the Manh Choh deposit. It's also where the Alaska pipeline comes in, crosses the Alaska Range on its route to Valdez. At one point, it was where A2A was going to go. And there you go. That's Tok. That's why it's there. The A2A Department of National Defense agreement was A2A was going to build the Delta Junction, which is right here, and then the U.S. military was going to build from North Pole, Alaska, down to Delta Junction. That was so expensive because you got to cross the Tanana River and the Delta River to do that. And the Tanana River is one of those rivers that you have to be cautious around. There's rivers that aren't scary, that are kind of friendly, and there's rivers that want to eat and destroy everything that's within striking distance of them. Tanana is and the Delta are very definitely in that latter category. So those are expensive bridges. And then get down now. The Alaska Railway itself is built to a 248 standard, I believe. For a class one, we'd want to up that to 265, preferably 286. Ideally, a 315, probably too much to ask, but 286 for sure. And the other thing I like, about South Central is not one port, it's four. You can mix and match what product goes where. Port McKenzie has got a right of way established to it. It's under development. It's suitable for container traffic, and there's enough space there for 3 Panamax size container vessels. And because of the way the tidal currents work in the Matanuska Fjord, Port McKenzie is ice-free year-round. You do get a little bit of ice some months in Anchorage, but it's not like Canadian ice. It's like, 2 inches thick. You can break it pretty easily. Anchorage has a small container port, which can complement it, but there's other space around Anchorage that would be quite suitable. And then you have Seward and Whittier, which are already connected by rail. Whittier has a tunnel out to Prince William Sound, and Seward is sort of the go-to place for the cruise ships, which is your typical fjord access. But what I like is that you have 4 ports you can choose from, and Seward isn't like super narrow. It's more like Kitimat. So the 4 in tandem can work well together. People say, well, what about major earthquakes? Yes, true. Earthquakes are an issue in Alaska, but they had the big one in the 1960s. They had the 9.2. And the geologists say that the big ones hit that area of Alaska about every 500 years. So I'm more worried about the big one over here, because the big one over here, the Cascadia earthquake, was in the year 1700 on January 19th. We know the date because the tsunami it generated hit Japan and killed people in Japan. The big one over here was 50 years ago, and the geologists say it's about 500 years of pressure. So I think we have a bit of a leeway of a century or two to worry about a super big earthquake. And because there's 4 ports, you have some redundancy built into that. You can also do a rail to pipe transfer at Tok to get so fuel trains might actually stop at Tok, unload, and just use the pipeline to get the fuel stuffs into Valdez. So, so that's the BC route. The BC route, because so much of it is already built and because it doesn't have that many crazy crossings, I estimated the cost of it from Edmonton at about 25 billion. Because all you're really doing, and that's just using the existing CN, that's a super cheap. Use the CN line to Fort St. James, rebuild this thing, build get past your environmentalists, build through Stickling Plateau, then just parallel the Alaska Highway the rest of the way. About 25 billion bucks. This is your super economical version. It gets you close to Golden Triangle, which isn't that big a deal because they're good. Golden Triangle is going to be using Stewart or Prince Rupert anyway. Um, but it doesn't get you close as I like to Mackenzie. So I'm going to hop inland and I'm going to look at the Alberta version of getting to Alaska, which I think is going to be the winner, both for political reasons and for economic reasons, even though it's $8 to $10 billion more. Oh gosh, Edmonton. You can't understand that. Let me see if I can zoom. I'll go over to Google Earth and I'll zoom in on Edmonton. It's good to understand what the heck Edmonton is doing in terms of rail corridors. Make a bridge from here. Okay, get north to the top. Okay. Red is CN, green is CP, existing, and white is abandoned. Your CN main lines are coming in from Vegreville and Toefield, and you're going out through Stony Plain, and this is our Sangudo spur that I'm saying is the one that needs to be the one through Grand Prairie to access Pine Point. That's this one. This one is going up to Hay River, or used to go to Hay River, goes to Northwest Territories. This one is going to Fort McMurray. So I'm gonna have to spend a couple of minutes here so you see what's going on and what used to go on here. So this white line used to be the North Edmonton bypass. It is not there anymore. It has been plowed over most of it, and I don't think the right of way there is there anymore. But this would be very useful if you're going to connect the north coast of BC to Hudson Bay, because if you're coming in this way from north coast BC, like I remember I talked about Burns Lake, Fort St. James, through Tumberlair Ridge, Grand Prairie, coming in this way, right now you've got to go into Edmonton to get through Edmonton and then back out again. I'll show you another one of those crazy strategic pinch points that nobody thinks about. Right there. Right there. Two tracks side by side. One stick of dynamite, you have separated the CN main line east system from your west system with no bypass. Right there, right in the middle of town. They used to have a bypass that went sort of through downtown, but they don't anymore. And they used to have this North Edmonton bypass, which would give you some of a bypass. I would want to extend it all the way down to the Sangudo spur so you can have a complete North Edmonton bypass. But that's another one of your crazy vulnerable pinch points is that double track just right outside downtown Edmonton. How do I know that? Because I'm such a geek that I've gone along every single mile of almost all of the track and looked at it by satellite and going, holy crap, what is this right here? Like it's separating the east and the west. East. Anyway, so is that white line, and then we have to talk about the Scotford-Bruderheim rail to pipe ecosystem. Look at the scale of this. You can judge by the size of the fuel tanks. These are the big 100-meter fuel tanks here. Look at the size of this thing. This is pipeline to rail transfer facility at Scotford. This is one of them. There's another one over here. There is a bigger one over here. And there's another one. There's more of them. And notice the CP, this is the most northerly extension of the Canadian Pacific Railway. This line you actually cross over when you drive through Edmonton, through South Edmonton, because it's this annoying track that just you're thumpa over all the time on all these different roads. That's the CP rail. That's a CP rail. That's one extension northward because they don't use the high level bridge anymore. Now what CP used to do, and they still have the right of way, I believe, is no, I'm not seeing it. I guess they don't. Oh, yep, I'm seeing some green there. Yes, they still have the right of way. So they used to extend from Bruderheim and go across this route over down to Lloydminster, way over here. Yeah, there's Lloydminster. So this is it. Most of it's deactivated. And then CN had these Camrose-based bypasses. So, and CP did as well. Okay, so there you go. There's your CP Edmonton West East bypass. It would go to Wetaskiwin, return up to Camrose, and this has been deactivated past Riley through Vegreville up to Willingdon, connecting with the line to Lloydminster. That has been shut down. And then CN shut down a line from Redwater to Cold Lake, which all the way at the border, which was given to a trails company for people to go snowmobiling on. For like, 250 bucks, they transferred over, and now they can't find enough snowmobilers who want a snowmobile from Cold Lake to Redwater. Surprise, surprise. I know the guy that helped organize that. Very nice fellow, but I really disagree with him on that decision. Now, what I found when I looked at the satellite over here is, I'm not seeing it right now, and I don't have it highlighted because I had to take that layer off. But there's stuff that looks like rail bed between Cold Lake and Meadow Lake. And look what you got. Look at what you got here. You got one little tendril ending there and another tendril ending here. How far is that? Not far. I'm migrating into the Hudson Bay talk here, but this is so you can see in context. Meadow Lake, the Meadow Lake First Nation there has a sawmill that is generating one truck every 5 minutes for wood products and wood pellets. What did I say about every 5 minutes? At around that every 5 minutes mark, you need to start thinking about trains. And this is all closed railway. Some of it still has track on it, all the way into Prince Albert. So I'll be talking about that more in the Hudson Bay component. But I'm getting back to Edmonton to talk about what's going in Edmonton as the natural hub. So where I think Alaska needs to tie in an ideal world, I would do three places. I would do three things. Number one, I would use the Sangudo Spur. Remember I showed you this big plant over here? These are the Swan Hills. I would extend this one north to McLennan. It's pretty flat. It's not, there's no permafrost here. It's just forest and a bit of farmland. There's no major settlements. There's no reserves. I would extend it up to here. And that gives you over and up. Option one. Option two, you've got your existing meander spur that it's built to fairly good capacity up to Smith, and after that it needs to be some rebuilding going on. I've walked along the rail bed along Lesser Slave Lake, and it's not suitable for a class one. Number two, I'd already mentioned about the route to Athabasca. I don't see that one reactivating. And sorry, well, there's the one. The number one would be the Yellowhead, and then number two would be that one. Number three would be a new crossing for rail at Vinca Bridge. The North Saskatchewan River is very easy to cross. Part of the reason that all this rail stuff is where it is because, well, the North Saskatchewan River makes a canyon through the city of Edmonton. Over here, it's nothing. It's, there's a bank maybe 30 meters high, 40 meters high down to the river, and then back up, and it's the same height and it's all flat around. So you build your bridge at a height of about 30 meters above river level, and the train doesn't even experience gradient shift to get across. And there's a road bridge here that's slated for demolition or removal. I found out that you can't really combine road and rail bridges, especially class one railways, because the vibration patterns are so different. Fair enough, but I still think this is where Alaska should connect, is right there. And then connect through Karinsky, where it would also connect to lines from Hudson Bay. So I would build another bypass. I'd either reactivate this bypass and have the trains go up and then down and then up again, or I would just build straight across. I would upgrade this route combined with this route. So you've got one, two, three. Now, when you get to north central Alberta, the blue line is the new 686 highway, and the yellow line is the PetroChina pipeline, the Grand Rapids pipeline. I've already talked to you about extending the McMurray line to Fort McKay, but it's $2 million to that short stretch. I don't really consider it to be viable. Now, the existing meander spur, I haven't talked about Peace River yet. Peace River is a barrier. I'm going to have to switch over to the other map here. Peace River forms a 250-meter canyon from the Site C Dam at Taylor all the way to near Lacrete, meaning any kind of infrastructure has to go all the way down 250 meters and then all the way back up again. If you've been to Peace River, Alberta, you've seen this. If you've driven into Fort St. John and crossed to Taylor, you've seen this. These are not friendly to Class 1 railways. The existing railway into Peace River has a higher weight rating in the winter than in the summer by 20,000 pounds because the track is frozen. And it's a 2.5% grade. And there's a cliff over here, so you can't make it a less grade unless you tunnel underneath the prairie for like 20 kilometers to come up on the other side. So remember I said earlier that the rivers kind of force all the railways in Alberta into one point, and that is Fort Vermilion. So here's your options, the dark green lines. You can go up the east side of Peace River. So this is the Swan Hills one. You can upgrade that from High Prairie to Springbank. You'd have to follow the east side of the Peace River up to Fort Vermilion. Or you can go to Slave Lake, the town of Slave Lake, head north from there and follow Highway 86, I think it is, which is most of it's pretty rail friendly. Not a lot of, there's a bit of permafrost, but not a lot to really scare you through. The Crete folks are usually very pro-industry, so they might prefer that route. The Big Stone Cree First Nation are quite pro-industry. They might prefer that route. Another route is to go up past Wabasca. And then this is the old A2A engineered route, which starts near the Fort McKay, Tar Island, and then up. You want to be close to Tar Island because that's where you get bitumen production. We're also looking at this route. I'll switch over to the Google Earth again. We're also looking at Tar Island. Okay, so this is basically the way the oil sands work. The stuff is mined here, 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 and here. And all the new mines you can't see because they're all underground. They just basically drill holes into the ground, they fill them with steam and force the bitumen to the surface and they take it out that way. They don't dig it up anymore. So you don't see all the other stuff that's going on around here. It's processed over here. This is Tar Island. This is where the raw bitumen is separated and processed. Some is put into pipelines, some is trucked out, etc. The A2A terminus was like right there. I'm not even sure why the terminus is not showing up right now, but you get the idea. This is your if you're going to be coming close to this is your industry point 0. Alberta Innovates, I'm not afraid to say their name, has developed a way to turn the solids portion bitumen into the world's best asphalt. The trick is you can put bitumen into a pipeline with solvents and heat it up, and it'll move through a pipeline, and then you have to separate it at another place, usually Edmonton. Or you spare yourself the solvents and you separate it here at Tar Island. And if you separate it here at Tar Island, the liquids don't need the solvent. You just stick them in the pipeline and they go. But then the solids, you have to do something to them, something fancy chemically, whatever, early, and to prepare it to be that asphalt. The asphalt cannot be shipped through a pipeline because it is a solid. It can be turned into cakes, so it can be put on a train, is like little pucks, or it can just be dumped into the train and shipped as asphalt. So that is a case we're trying to use for at least getting a oil sands to mainline to existing network rail connection. This doesn't really work for Fort McMurray for the reason I told you, because of that going through the downtown and getting through the Sapere Creek area. So here's Peace River coming in. As I said, here's Athabasca River. Here's the Peace River. Where they meet is over here at Lake Athabasca, and they form a massive swamp, which is full of permafrost. And it's next to the Wood Buffalo National Park. You're not putting infrastructure through here unless you basically unless you can manufacture gold and hire 10 million people to do it for you. You're crossing at Fort Vermilion. Fort Vermilion, the canyon of the Peace ends, and it's sedate on either side, and it hasn't become a swamp yet. So this is where A2A crossed, and this is where any Class 1 railway heading to Alaska is going to cross somewhere in here. It's going to, where I disagreed with A2A rail is then they drew a straight line from here to Lake Bistcho, which had Three major problems with it. Number one, it went up and over the foot of Caribou Mountains, 150 meters up and 150 meters down. They said, oh, we don't care because it's still a 1% grade. I said, well, who cares? Like you add a mile distance and you can make that straight line into a curve and you save yourself that 150 meters up and down. Why are you so insistent on a straight line to Meander Spur? Which is why I don't even show it. Number two, they drew a straight line from Meander River, the community of Meander River, straight over to the west end of Lake Bistro. Lake Bistro is sacred to the Denizah people. There's about 1,000 burial sites in the Cameron Hills around here that they know about. And they were so interested in the railway, they shared the information to us without making us sign an NDA first. So I'm looking at the map and I'm a geographer and I'm like, trains can't wiggle like a road, like a country road on on an English countryside. They have to go straight or very close to straight. These are the heritage sites, the burial sites we know about. I guarantee you, if you keep a straight line through this, we're going to discover an extra 1,000 of them. And every single time we're going to have to do a proper, evaluation, archaeological dig, da 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 da, burial, reburial, all that kind of stuff. Like, and it's each one of those is going to be a major emotional up and down. And it's like, no, like why would you do that? And third major problem was high level, excuse me, is all over this. They know what they've got here. They have this rail route on their OCP, so does Mackenzie County. They're like, this is our ticket. CN has not been serving us well for decades. This will give us what we need to really go, because high level is one of the few places in the prairies that has gravel they can build. They have agriculture. They have water. They have enough population, and they have space to grow. They're all over it, and they've got access to energy, obviously. So this is a potential major industrial center. They're all over this. So you're going to have to go through high level. Spare you the details going around what. And then Zama City, same thing. Zama City is close to Chate. Chate is the de facto capital of Denetah territory, which is basically this portion of Alberta. And Zama City is the terminus of the Cenovus pipeline coming in from Norman Wells. Norman Wells, if you don't know, is a community up on Mackenzie River that has a crazy amount of gas and oil in it. Like, if I said a billion cubic feet of liquefied natural gas, a billion cubic feet of gas, I don't think I'd be exaggerating. There's a pipeline from there, and notice I put 8 of those oil barrel symbols there, and those don't represent gas. That represents oil, and that, by comparison, this is Firebag. There's a lot of oil there, and NWT is such that they can't get it out. So anyway, this is where the pipeline comes out. So could be another massive industrial zone, which would warrant having that connection over to the Fort Nelson Spur were it ever to be realized. It took me a long time, but I figured out a gradient that works. And it's green because this was still done in the context of A2A, so I'm still communicating directly with engineers. So basically going up this side, cutting up the slope of Cameron Hills, and then coming in near Lake Bistro, but not at Lake Bistro. Bistro, by the way, is the cultural heartland of the Denizah, and they don't want a railway going by, a mile-long train every 30 minutes along their lake. I totally get it. Once you get into this territory, you are getting into permafrost. I will, and I have spent, along with my associates, probably way too much time looking at this. Notice these dots? Permafrost. Those are permafrost bonds, for sure. And the train, I can actually show you this line, but I somehow turned off the layer. But anyway, it's coming through here. It's basically quite very, very flat. There's just this tiny area of permafrost, and then it reverts to, you can see different gradients. This is a good introduction to permafrost. When you see these dots, you want to avoid those. Where it looks more like this, it's more muskeggy, it's soft, but the frost content may be 30 to 50% as opposed to like 60 to 80%, or, so there is a corridor right through here that works quite well, that A2 identified. It looks like it looks like the route is just going around BC despite British Columbia, but actually that's the way the geography works. You actually have to go around the corner of British Columbia. That's what that is the corner of British Columbia. And the Sambake Nation has said, we don't want to see industrial development in here, but don't go right down to the border. So it all fits together quite nicely. A nice corridor right through here. Is that expensive build? Yes, but it is not freaky permafrost type stuff. It's a bit more of that ponding thing going on. You have to stay on this side of you have to stay between the Petato River and this river. I can't remember the name of it. Um, Now you come into the Liard, which is one of those evil, scary rivers. The Liard the local folks, the Decho Nation, say if you get drowned in the Liard, your body will never be found. If you get drowned in the Mackenzie, we will find you. There's good reasons for that. It originates up in the mountains of the Musqueam Ranges, which are steep mountains that generate, they have some years they have really high snowpack, but they also can have very hot summers. So you can get those big freshets. And if you look at some of these forested islands inside the Liard flood basin, the Liard is very capable of taking out that entire island in a week. And look at the size of these. These aren't little trees. These aren't those little stick things you see. These are 50-foot trees here. So imagine that island being taken out, and then in some major freshet, and then flowing downstream. And it's going to go right past Fort Liard. Fort Liard has been flooded a couple of times, and it is fairly high up. But A2A, the engineers put the bridge right here because it looked kind of easy to put it on. And I was like, immediately, I'd been on a ferry in the Liard in a freshet, and I said that bridge will either be taken out or the train will be in water. Another way to look at it is this arm is a spur of the local mountain of the Mackenzie Mountains coming down to the river, which is why the river is forced to go around it. That tells you that this spur has got a rocky core. But look closely. You see these rings? You see those curves? You might not be able to say it online. Those are flood lines. The river at high mark is flowing. This is its bank way up here. And that's at marking at 229, 230 meters above sea level. The river's at 218. The river goes up by 50 feet. The river blasts down here. It sloshes up. Imagine water moving down a water slide. It's sloshing down. It's sloshing up and around and then down like that. You have to build with that in mind. So my suggestion was to use this slope and connect here to here with a high pylon bridge. The river, it will file up here, but you could put a heavily armored pier here, and that's about a 500-meter gap. So this is a major expense of this route, is you have to cross this river. Then getting through the toe of the Yukon, it's called also the Liard Plateau, I believe. You get through this gap in the mountains here, and then you just have to basically contour your way through to Watson Lake. This is a good 600 kilometers because of all the wiggles you have to do. Switch back to the other map. So you basically have to follow all these different valleys. Once you've crossed the Liard River, get into Watson Lake. And then I've already described this route. What I would do, I would follow the A2A route from here. I would go north to the Tintina Trench, which is a geological structure, which low to moderately low seismic risk, and then follow it all the way down. I did spend a lot of time at A2A looking at a route farther north, which I call the McMillan route, which is to go basically the next valley up, which is what this line is, and it's yellow because the engineers never looked at it seriously as an option. It has a 100-kilometer route, but my thinking was, when I did it, was it gets the train right up to Selwyn, right up to McMillan Pass, like really close to strategic, crest, and then following the McMillan River down. There's the Granite Canyon, which is a potential great aggregate source, and then what I already talked about was that lava flow at the Pelly River there. And either route, you're going to get really close to Casino. Casino would link into this the next day. So we get Casino, which is the other big deposit, up and running. So the mining people I talked to, they talked me out of. I love this route, but the mining people said, "Look, if we build Selwyn, we don't care if we're driving 30 kilometers or 130 kilometers. We're just happy we're not driving 1,500 kilometers." Worth mentioning at this stage is that the old canal route is rail friendly. At least this bit is. this bit has not been surveyed. The canal road goes up and over a pass into Teslin, so that's not suitable for rail, but you could possibly, the Mactung, if you have this line running, then you could have other connections to other mining across Yukon route using the portions of the canal route. And then these highways are topographically suitable for rail, but you're not gonna be building both of them. You're gonna build one or the other. It's just there to be consistent. Then you come into Tok, you cross the Ledoux River, you'd leave the Yukon River south of Dawson City, and then you'd have to cross the White. This is another significant crossing of the river is not enormous, but its gravel load is crazy. So you have to build a bridge from side of the valley to side of the valley. So that's another billion and a half there for that bridge. And then you come into Tok that way. This little dotted line is basically my little note saying, hey, if the Alaska route doubles as a tourism railway, then let's stop the trains here, put people on a paddle steamer to go down to Dawson City and enjoy Dawson City, and then take the paddle steamer back. How authentic would that be? And that's one of my arguments actually, is we never looked at tourism or passenger studies, but I actually think that a 2-week hotel on rails from Anchorage to Miami would be something that could be marketed to the entire American population as being a rite of passage. Will be the longest passenger service on the planet. And even if you only get like 0.1% of the American population doing it, that's still 40,000 people a year, right? So I can see that being a major money maker. Now, moving a little bit over, the canal route, once you get into the Mackenzie Mountains, the Satu Nation asked me to look into a connection, and basically the way I look at the Mackenzie Mountains, I'll zip over to the Google Earth so you can see what I'm looking at, what I picture in my mind a bit better. It's a little bit sideways what you'd expect. So you can always tell where McMillan Pass is by this particular mountain. It's Mount Keel, I think. It's like the most prominent peak, so you can always find where McMillan Pass is. See, the valleys in Yukon are nice and wide, and you have a very gradual incline, so you can get up into here. And then it's a bit of a hump to get over to the Northwest Territories side, although you can, if you're doing a tourism train, you can go down and around this way and maintain the 1% grade. Once you get into the Mackenzie Mountains, first directly, the higher up mountains are actually easier, which kind of surprised me. I usually think of the higher altitude stuff as being harder, but that's because the gravel hasn't built up yet. And there's a whole maze of valleys through here, and the canal road picks a certain system of getting through the different valleys, going up some, down the right, left, right. There's nothing direct, and I was looking at this going, this is like the best tourism train ride on Earth, potentially. It's all alpine. It's all wildlife. There's nobody here. It's all above tree line. It's not, it's on permafrost, but it's not like crazy. Most of it's not that crazy difficult permafrost, and it's got warm summers. And I'm like, this is like the prime location for a tourism railway. So that's the western side of the Mackenzie Mountains. As you go downstream towards the Mackenzie River, you start seeing this. You start seeing the steep slides, permafrost-laden steep slides going into rivers with these signs of anastomosed and debris flows. It becomes almost the worst of all worlds. And I had to tell my associates in Decho and Satu, I can't confirm for you that you can get a train to the river. Because when I'm looking at stuff like this, steep slopes, cliffs, permafrost, look at this. This tells you the kind of gravel load that this river is carrying. That river could be over here next year and over here the year after that, which means, and these slopes are actively eroding. They don't have vegetation. This one does have vegetation. This one doesn't, but you have to get past it. It's going to have permafrost in it. So you're going to have to keep frozen, or you go on the south side. But then you have to go around this headland. I looked at this and I'm like, okay, if you're getting from Norman Wells or Toledo to halfway through the Mackenzie Mountains, I think it's going to be $25 billion to go from there to there. I just don't see it happening. So I said, I don't see it happening. If you're going to they're interested in a passenger rail service down the Mackenzie River to service their communities there for resupply. And I said, I think your best bet is to start down here and we'll find a major gravel source in Yukon. The one thing Yukon has is gravel. Either crush it or it's already there. Yukon has crazy amounts of gravel and it's good quality stuff. Some is ARD, some is not, but there's a lot of it. So if you have this railway running, I would start at Fort Liard and start building north. And I basically use your trains as a gravel conveyor. And just because you're going to have 3, 4, 5 meter bases, it's still going to be cheaper than the crush you're getting out of local quarries because you're paying $150 a cubic once you get up in this area for crushed gravel. It's still going to be cheaper if you found a mass supply source and just train it out, train it out, train it out, and build your track as you go. And I think that's the best way to get to the delta. Now, I've already mentioned Norman Wells. I've already mentioned Crest. I've given you some taste of the difficulties of getting to Crest. I mean, see, even if we're down here at Campbell River, Crest is suddenly so much closer, right? And Mackenzie Delta, there's a lot of oil there. Gas offshore, oil onshore. Um, the issue with Mackenzie Delta, and I'll actually hop over to this this is hydrometric depths. Okay, here you can see it. Ice Age Mackenzie Delta was 100 miles offshore what it is today. The Mackenzie River existed during the last ice age, and it was carrying gravel and glaciated sediments out to the ice age Arctic Ocean. And it formed a delta that big. What rivers do in deltas is they go from side to side. You know, they carry sediment in the spring and fall freshets. They carry more sediment, and then the river level goes down in the summer and winter. And now that sediment is now higher than next door in the other part of the delta. So the river switches to a different part of the delta, and it basically goes back and forth. And over the eons, it builds up these alluvial fans. This is an enormous alluvial fan. The one that everybody knows how big the Mackenzie Delta is. It goes another 100 miles offshore. And that's why when people say, well, let's turn Tuck into Canada's northern port, they go like, yeah, but it's like 4 feet deep offshore at low tide. So some folks in Yukon are looking at Kings Point, which is right there. So you can see the Ice Age Mackenzie Delta ends here, and then, well, it actually ends way out here, but you can see it's like 65 feet offshore. So you can get off here. Other people will say the concern for the porcupine caribou herd is such that you're never getting anything industrial in here, especially with Trump opening in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Fair enough. I am just giving out geographic data to you. So the best place for a port in Canada's northwest coast is there. Simply put, geographically state, because it's deep. It's not particularly sheltered, but the Arctic Ocean isn't known for really bad storms because the ice tends to keep the wave count down. But if Canada was to have a high capacity a port, it would actually be on the north coast of Yukon, access through the Mackenzie River off the Mackenzie Delta. I don't think that's going to be politically palatable, so more people are talking about some kind of crazy long 20-mile pier out of Tuktoyaktuk. You talk to the local fleet people in Inuvik, what they'll say is, screw it, don't do any port. Just get your oil off, because all the oil is on this island here. Do a pipeline out to sea, because you can just it's easy to monitor pipelines that are that short offshore because they're on the surface, and if there's a leak, you catch it immediately, and you have floating pontoons on either side. It's easy, and that's where you do your export of oil and gas. Gas is from the actual delta undersea. So that's the discussions about that side. Go back to this map, and that about wraps it up for Alaska. Questions?
I saw one question from Sam pertaining to Well, actually, Sam, are you still there? If you are, you want to ask your question now? Sam, if you're there, you got to take
Yeah,
your.
yeah, I am here. I was just wondering if he's looked at maglev at all, and if he has any numbers for the maximum cost of electrical power that can make maglev viable, especially for freight. If you've done any research on maglev for freight, anything on Chinese developments in maglev, be very interested to hear.
Maglev has enormously high costs per kilometer, and it has zero, very close to zero tolerance for engineering error or ground movement. A freight train is chunking along at 50, 80, 100 kilometers an hour, chugga, 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 and the tracks wiggle a bit. There's a lot of there's give and play on there. If you watch a train go by, at a crossing, your local town crossing, you'll see the tracks often go down 2, 3 inches as the wheel goes by. When you go up to high speed rail, which is conventional rail that's moving at 250 kilometers an hour plus, it enters a different world of engineering, um, where those tracks can't move. And usually the sleepers have to be concrete instead of wood. Um, and the costs go up considerably per kilometer. Uh, and high speed is really only considered for passenger because the passenger trains are so much later. One thing that makes high speed rail planning easier is that trains don't care. They don't like turning, but they actually don't care about going up or down. They're the Lamborghinis of trains. If you put a 100-meter slope and 100-meter elevation gain in front of a high speed train, whatever, it just goes over it. Doesn't care. It's a 40 megawatt train. It doesn't care. When you get into maglev, you're dealing with concrete magnets and high-powered magnets embedded in concrete. And the trains are usually moving at starting at 300 up to 600 kilometers an hour. God forbid if that concrete is 1 inch out. So they have to have a laser quality system which is monitoring that track all the time. So the train, if any kind of motion, ground movement, whatever, that that laser will let you know, and you shut that train down right now. Um, do you know when you're on a boat or even a canoe, there's a V wave in the water at the front end of the boat, and it spreads out on either side. And when you're walking along the side of a highway and a big truck goes by, and you can feel the ground move a little bit under your feet. Those two things are exactly the same thing. It is a pressure wave generated by the motion of a heavy object across a surface. On water, it's very easy to see because you just look at the wave of the water. When you're on land, it's the same thing. You just don't see it because it's not a full wave, but there is a pressure wave moving through the ground, causing it to shake, what we sense as shake. But if you were mapping the shake, you would quickly see a V shape. Trains are exactly the same. When a train is going across permafrost, you will see you're basically doing a V wave on ice. If the faster the train goes, the higher the V wave. So a maglev moving on permafrost is going to have one heck of a V wave, which means you need to keep that ice cold. And I don't mean like -5 cold. I mean like -35, -40 cold to keep it hard enough to handle those kinds of pressures. So the costs would, yeah, it's not even, it's for what we're talking about. Maglev is useful for shorter haul passenger services. It's not in the cards for what we're talking about today.
Cool. And Tony, you said you have a short question. Tony, take yourself off of mute, please, and then ask your question. Okay. I don't. I see that you're trying, Tony, but it's not working out. You can write it out if you want to write it. You can do that.
Okay. Well, while that's happening, I'll jump into the Hudson Bay options. Um, I'll start from the ports and move my way in. So I'm going to switch back over to this guy. Okay. The first port selected for Hudson Bay was Port Nelson. Everybody's raising their hand saying Churchill. No, it was Port Nelson. Um, Port Nelson is at the mouth of the Nelson River. The Nelson River, by another name, is the Saskatchewan River. So it's the Old Man, the Saskatchewan, North Saskatchewan, South Saskatchewan, all those guys, they all combine together in the Nelson River and they exit here at York Factory. And there was a Hudson Bay post, and it's not showing much about the depths at this time, but the issue with Port Nelson is that there's a lot of sediment in the Nelson River, and the waters in the western Hudson Bay are very shallow. The Hudson Bay is there because it was the center of the Laurentian ice sheet. When the Laurentian ice sheet went away, the ground underneath it, which had been pressed down by 2 or 3 kilometers of ice, like in Antarctica, lifted. And it is still lifting today. I have a house on the shores of Arviat, and I'm pretty sure I've owned it for 10 years, and I'm pretty sure the house is a few inches higher than it was when I bought it. So there's uplift going on along the entire west coast of Hudson Bay for sure. And combine that with sedimentation from the river creates really shallow drafts. So the issue at Port Nelson was shallow drafts. So they started building a railway to Port Nelson, and then they changed their mind and switched to Churchill, which is farther north. They switched to Churchill because this harbor that you see is formed by granite, a granite outcrop of the Canadian Shield. So they could put port facilities on the harbor without having to worry about permafrost. Remember I said earlier, if it's a rock on a permafrost and the rock is deep enough, you already have your foundation built for you. It's actually the easiest kind of construction anywhere. You need to find those places, and they're not always logically where they are. So the river exits out through what was the Hudson Bay factory and where they put the granaries. The issue with Churchill is that Churchill River, although it doesn't have anywhere near the same sediment load as the Nelson River, the harbor is still very, very shallow. Look, I'm seeing numbers 2.3 at low tide, 4.6. These are feet. You can't put an ocean-going vessel in that. So what they did is when you see a square line like that in the profile of your hydrographic, that tells you that there's been dredging going on. They have dug this out to make access. So here's a nice long pier, a couple of Panamaxes you could fit in there. And then they've dredged this channel to the open Hudson Bay. And that's pretty much the reason why everybody says, well, let's build a Churchill if we want to get to Europe the easiest. Fair enough. The one thing with this isn't really wide enough for a larger ship to turn around. So the ship is coming in, it's parking, and then it's backing out the same way, probably with tugboats. Now, I lived in Arviat, and I never questioned this because at Arviat, there's a spot out here where's Arviat? Here, Arviat. Doesn't really show up here, but there's a spit of land out here. This green is the tidal flat. So at low tide, you don't walk because there's too many polar bears. But you can take your ATV from here out to here. And at high tide, the water is going to be to your hair. It's going to be cold, so you don't want to do that. But so when the freighters came every summer, the shipping season is sort of July to November. You'd always see them way offshore. They're way out here, right? And it's only 11 feet deep at this point. And I never put it together. And then I was just poking around, doing what I do. And went up to Rankin Inlet, which is here. And I see depths of 42 feet right offshore. And I'm going, what? No, this is Hudson Bay. And I thought about, no, when I fly into Rankin Inlet in November, I often see the freighter parked like right there, often like right in here. Okay, so this is the 92 feet off here. Like these are deep water. Oh, okay. So I looked around some more. Chesterfield Inlet, right offshore, 300 feet deep. What? Right? So I'm just out of curiosity. I've never looked at Chesterfield Inlet before, and I'm going these narrow stretches, 65 feet deep, 95 feet deep, a couple of rocks. Oh, there's a 30-foot deep, right? But then out here, 65 feet deep. Oh, sorry, this is the lake. You don't want to go all the way to the lake. This Baker Lake is freshwater, and this is the river connecting them. So over here, we're seeing 100 feet deep. Guys, this is 200 kilometers inland. 200 kilometers, straight line distance from here to here. And I'm thinking, hold on. Now let's go over to the ice conditions. I don't know if this graphic will help or not. Oh, go away, Acrobat advertising. I'm going to describe Hudson Bay to you a little bit. What you get in Hudson Bay is this is from a report that was done in the 80s for the Canadian government. Just a quick summary of ice conditions in Hudson Bay. You get a polynya from, okay, so this is not Walvis Bay, Wager Bay. Chesterfield Inlet is coming in here. You get this polynya from the exit of the inlet all the way around the Hudson Bay, except for James Bay. The reason that line is there, it's a very long, thin area of open water. The reason it is there is the ice is all 6 to 8 feet deep, but you get two components of the ice. You get the center part, which is 6 to 8 feet deep, which is, with the tides is just going up and down, straight up and down. But then you get the shore fast ice, where one side of the ice is anchored on the ground, and it flexes like this. Yeah, I mean it's I'm oversimplifying it, but anyway, where the two meet, you get a crack. And because of other tidal forces, it tends to create areas of open water in a linear format. This is why there's so many polar bears in Churchill and Arviat, for that matter, because they stay here through the winter because they can breathe. And that's where the polar bears go, so they can eat the seals and belugas that are trying to breathe. And that's why the polar bears are on land at Churchill for us to drive past in our buggies and look at them and take pictures in the summertime because they're waiting for the ice to refreeze so they can go back out where the seals aren't floating around. So I'm looking at this and I was thinking, if you're talking about year-round shipping on Hudson Bay and you're coming around at Port Nelson or Churchill, 90% of the time in the middle of winter, and middle of the winter means 6 to 8 months a year, that icebreaker is not going to go from here to here in a straight line. That icebreaker is going to follow the polynya because it's dealing with either open water or ice that's a foot deep or 2 feet deep, 2 feet thick, as opposed to 6 to 8 feet thick. And the salinity in Hudson Bay is very low because there's all these big rivers coming into it, and there's a lot of tidal currents in Hudson Strait, but there's not a lot of interchange. So it's not a lake, but it's not anywhere, it doesn't taste that salty. I've swum in it. It's not salt. It's not very salty. You get very hard ice. The higher the salt content, the softer the ice, and vice versa. So it's very hard ice.
Hey, sorry to
Yep.
interrupt you there, Peter, but I promised Matt that I wouldn't be too long. And
Sure.
what I'd really like to get to, I understand what you're saying, and it's fascinating, believe me. But your presentation has been a bit Western centric. Have you looked at the Eastern Hudson Bay and Baffin Island and Newfoundland and Labrador for ports and access?
No, my study area is west of Ontario.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, Canada's a huge country and there's a lot to cover here. So, but just a little fill in. Were you aware that the Cold Lake Spur on the railway line, it was made to provide jet fuel to the Cold Lake Air Base, which was constructed in the 1950s. And
I did not know that.
I spent many years in Cold Lake, and it transitioned from the rail spur with hundreds of tanker trucks bringing in, or rail cars bringing in jet fuel, to hundreds and hundreds of transport trucks bringing in jet fuel. So this goes along with what you're saying. There is a very good economic case to have a rail line up to Cold Lake just for the jet fuel alone. Nothing to do with anything going out of Cold Lake. And of course, Cold Lake is now a very big petrochemical or petroleum producer too. So I'm totally agreeing with what you're saying. It's just a little fill-in to say this is how it happened, and it's another example of how sea and rail has abandoned reality in their pursuit of profit. Yeah.
Understood. Thanks very much for that comment. I value that comment. I always learn something new.
Yeah. Anyway, I really appreciate what you brought to us today. It's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that.
And there's so much more.
Tony, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
I think I
Okay.
appreciate that. Well, I think we're coming into starting out in wrap up stage. I've gone through two of the three major ones. I guess another thing that I want to highlight, an issue with Churchill and Port Nelson for terms of year-round shipping, is the winds are northwesterlies, and floating ice gets pushed south. So if you that's what these other diagrams for. I won't go over them in much detail. I'll go back to a map here. This one. So the other factors are Hudson Strait, which is this area, basically never freezes over. Rarely, if ever, do you hear about an Inuk snowmobiling from Kingate to one of these to Apsaytuk Island, or even farther across to Quebec, because there is so much current through here. It's cracked ice. So actually ice breaking through here is not that difficult. The second highest tidal range in the world after Fundy Bay in New Brunswick, I believe, is down near Kangerlussuaq over here somewhere. This extreme tidal flux through here. The most stable ice in this area is between, I can't remember, Coates, I think it's Coates, this island and Southampton Island. But what you do see is if you look at an ice map from May, which I did, this is the area that opens first. So I actually, when I'm talking to some folks in the Canadian government and some others, I'm saying, you guys are all talking about, everybody's talking about Churchill. Some folks are, half-heartedly talking about Port Nelson. I think you need to be talking about Chesterfield Inlet. The other factor that I learned from an oblong comment, because I lived in Nunavut for 10 years. You see the map, you see the satellite of Southampton Island? It's, most of the tundra is this dark color, and you got all this pale stuff on Southampton Island. You got some of the darker stuff, but you got a lot of the pale. This is all gravel. That is all gravel. All of this light stuff is gravel, ready to use. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of gravel. I have no idea why it's there, but it's there. I've seen it for myself. I've been to Coral Harbor. I walked out, and yeah, there's gravel. You fly in, fly out. Yeah, you look around. It's gravel everywhere. That's why there's not a lot of vegetation. The vegetation is a tough time colonizing gravel. I have no idea. I have no idea. So I can't help but imagine a barge service coming in up Chesterfield Inlet. The other thing with Chesterfield Inlet, it's very hard ice, but it's so narrow and it's so deep, and the winds are almost always from the northwest. So there's not a lot of fetch. You don't get major winds, and I'm just like, an icebreaker just has to keep cracking back and forth on exactly the same route all winter long, and it's never going to get that deep. And you have to have the freighters following the icebreaker through here or around that way, one of those two, and then out this way. But there's actually not a lot of, all things considered, this is much slower ice breaking than to Churchill, if you're talking about ice year round. Seasonal service, yeah, Churchill's the way to go. So I guess this image of these barges full of gravel coming in to a port over here and building out this way with the trains carrying gravel as the primary load and starting over from high level as well and other locations in Yukon. You see tying it together? See what I mean? Um, so switching back over to this map. So I've shown the version of going along the coast, which would be enormously expensive because it's all swampland. Farther inland, it's lower moisture content. So I've shown a line, which I had taken off, but I put it back again, and that military is actually interested in this one. Cross at Fort McKay, connect to the Simonson oil sand deposit, and then if you take a ruler, go from Simonson oil deposit to Churchill, what do you get? Stony Rapids, Ferguson Lake, iron, and zinc. Is that economical? I don't know. Should it be looked at? Yes. Um, so I see 3 potential ports on Hudson Bay. Now, in terms of linkages, this may take less time than you think. I've already talked about Cold Lake and Meadow Lake, but we can extend from there. There's deactivated railways. My study zone I sort of set as the CN main line. I didn't look south at this in great detail, but if you had a map of all the deactivated line, you know what? I do have a map of all the deactivated lines. All those white lines are deactivated railways in the Canadian prairies. About 30% of the total. This is why farmers are frustrated. This is why farmers are using trucks and why people are investing in grain terminals and you're dealing with the issues nowadays. Look at the amount of white deactivated railways that are on there. It's nuts. Anyway, slight segue. So I mapped out as best as I could. The orange dot lines are deactivated railways north of the CN line. But basically what I see as the most promising is Cold Lake, as we just discussed, which the route does continue into Cold Lake, although the track was never laid from Cold Lake into Saskatchewan. You'd have to do new build into Meadow Lake. We've already talked about the industry at Meadow Lake. You can just follow existing tracks into Prince Albert. There's another alternative. You could go down this way, but I think this makes more sense because switch back to this map is you see you can sort of see the shield is forested. It's this dark green, and the prairies is this kind of tan color, which is deforested or it was never forested, it's grasslands. You can see the prairies kind of end around here, but then there's a band of trees, and then there's another last gasp of prairie lands, sort of Cold Lake, Meadow Lake, Prince Albert, Nipawin. So what I'm arguing is, look, rebuild that one, build new here, reactivate this one, reactivate this one, reactivate this one, reactivate this one, and you have another north-south corridor right across the country, at least in elemental form, because you already have your track to Churchill, which needs to be repaired. This isn't big bucks to get it going. The reason these economically failed, I will argue, is because they never connected in the first place. They were envisioned as part of the Central Canada Railway in the 1920s, but they never built the interprovincial connections at this border and at this border. Build it across, and they will come. That's a rule with trains. Get from coast to coast. Don't do spurs. If they're going from one place to another place, from port to port, you will have success. So if you got Church, so in medium term, when I'm saying, okay, upgrade your railway to Churchill, reactivate your line from Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan. It's called Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan for a very good reason. Connect to Tisdale, use this one, reactivate all this, get into Kerensky, and then you either have a line, you either upgrade your line into Scotford, where it can tie into your line to Alaska, or you reactivate the line across North Edmonton, or you can connect to the line to Grand Prairie. And now you have a new line to Prince Rupert. With time comes on, you can add on other spurs like Burns Lake, Fort St. James. When you're really looking down the roads to, up in here in the Mosque Minaret, down through Fort St. James. And And you can also, well, another upgrade to definitely consider if Churchill is heavily used is Thompson directly to Churchill and bypass this route because the railway was being built to Port Nelson, then they changed their mind and they switched direction and went down to Churchill. The problem, this is all mush. You see this symbol? That means swamp. Swamp in an Arctic environment means very high frost content, very difficult, which is all the difficulties they're having. So if you go straight across the higher lands out of the swamps, it'll be much more suitable for heavy haul railway. Down the road, if you want to think about it, you could do a shortcut at the PA directly to Nipawin, which was Nipawin. There's a line extending out of Nipawin that's looking at the PA, but it never actually made it. You could do that. That gives you a bit of a shortcut, but that is your overland Northwest Passage right there. First version of it. Second version of it, you can look at other options that I don't think will work. Basically, this line and this line. Janus Lake, I don't know. I don't have a solution to that one because this is all difficult build and this gets very difficult build. And this is a $30 billion route. And I don't see Churchill carrying $30 billion worth of traffic. Another route at Flin Flon, another possibility. Michelina Bay is coming online soon. It's quite a large deposit, not what I call a mega deposit, but very big. But there's already a rail line. There's already a mining-based spur at Flin Flon. Just extend it. Okay, just extend it across the border from Manitoba into Saskatchewan. And that's your best way to get it. You know, there's some folks have taught about a line from Thompson all the way through here. Again, I've got trouble seeing the usefulness of it. But for me, if you have this line through here, you can do that even if you don't have year-round shipping at Churchill. Just have your 3 to 4 months a year at Churchill for now. These lines connect to other things. Have your storage and lay down areas at Churchill. That's all you got to do. This would be like $2-3 billion. It's almost like the federal government loses that amount of money every day in misplaced asset allocations. This would be a little bit more, but again, really at the end of the day, that's all you need. That's brand new. The rest of it's there. The Grand Cache line connecting to the Sangudo Spur. That little yellow bit is all you need. And you have a connection, Churchill to Prince Rupert. You have a third Trans-Canada corridor right there. Now, longer term, I'm saying if you're really looking at doing ice breaking and you do want Hudson Bay year round, which would definitely be the interests of Matt can probably tell you better than me, who would really want that. I would do a serious comparison of the 3 options before you invest, because any one of these options is going to be for year-round service in the tens of billions of dollars to build. Now, for fun, I've extended the spur all the way up to Mary River, crossing the 2-kilometer wide Fury and Hecla Strait to connect Baffin Island. Take that for what it is. This is all very rocky terrain. Technically, it doesn't scare me as much as actually the flats way down farther south in Churchill. The size of these areas cannot be understated. Like here to here is like, Victoria to Fort Nelson. Like you go from really far north to insanely far north. And once you're up here, when you're up here, it kind of changes your whole perspective on hundreds of miles, because I've lived up here. But for fun, because there is 2 proposed railways, one from Mary River to Clip Sound, one to Mary River South, both of which were crappily designed. The short version of how it was happened was they said we need a railway because we've got too much for trucks. So their alternatives routing assessment analysis in 2012 was 7 pages long. I know because I looked it up, and their 4-foot long environmental impact statement. And half of that was maps, really bad maps. I said, oh, we can go here, we can go here, we can go here, we can go here. And it was like one paragraph, why this is the only spot. But they didn't look even at here, and they didn't look at down over here. It was all qualitative, nothing quantitative. And as I explained earlier, they picked a route that was based completely on topography because the engineer they hired is a guy with a PhD in engineering from India who lives in Toronto. Nothing, I'm not knocking Indian engineers. They just build one of the highest rail bridges in the world. They do a good job, but they don't know permafrost. And they completely undercalculated what it would cost to do that. So then they said it's going to be $5 billion. Okay, we have to go to Clip Sound, which they had ruled out because of ecological uncertainty and ice conditions. There's a lot of tidal current in a Clip Sound, and it is ecological hotspot. everything lives there. You do, and they built a road there anyway, and they want to do ice breaking. And guess what? They were actually right. They said, you know, you prevent an ice, the ice breaking creates, with the combined with the tidal forces, creates these insane ice ridges, where if you break the ice and then the tidal forces, these two plates of ice together, the tidal forces will continue, and you'll get like plate tectonics, where you get fracturing, rising, forcing ice down. You'll get ice ridges that are, you know, struck down like 30, 40 feet deep under the water from all the tidal currents forcing things down. It is nuts. So they just had to switch back to summer use only with very limited ice breaking. Compare that to Nain over in Labrador, which which one of our persons just mentioned, where the tidal currents aren't like that. So they're able to create a much more civilized form of ice breaking, where the ice breaking goes on the same track, and they actually have snowmobile traffic control at Nain for ice breaking tracks, and they have the communication system. So the icebreaker is coming through for the next week you have to go down this ice road path and cross over here. There'll be a bridge installed over the icebreaker track. You cross it until it refreezes thick enough to cross safely by snowmobile, that kind of thing. So I just extended because I'm trying to be north and west holistic. I know I'm not including the northern end of Quebec on that, but because I don't foresee a trail bridge across the northern end of Hudson Bay, so I consider that a reasonable end of my study zone. But I figured this is a reasonable termination. I did used to have a yellow line that went all the way down to Kimmeroot, but I took it out because I haven't looked at it closely enough. And um, there's a certain ecological side of me that actually kicks in, which you may find surprising. But I camped right there at the top end of the Kooktujwak River. I love the word Kooktujwak. It sounds like something that should be in a circus or something. Right on the shores of Nettling Lake. And I drank the water from Nettling Lake. I couldn't taste it. And there's something special about this place. And this is all swamps below it, and it's hills above it. And I'm like, getting around this, something against me is opposed to idea of any kind of infrastructure going above the lake, because the clarity of the lake is something special that I'd say everyone should experience once in their life. And also found out later that the Inuit declared that this area here is what they call the caribou refuge zone. During very hard winters, they say all the caribou go to this portion of Nettling Lake. They don't go there. They only go there about once every 30 years, but that's where they go because there's something about the ice and snow and vegetation, whatever. They're able to survive really harsh winters here, which happen once in a human generation. So I don't know. I took that line off because it just felt wrong, and I didn't see a use for it. Although I still think it's pretty cool to have the idea of a Iqaluit taking a train from Vancouver to Iqaluit. I think it's still pretty cool, but that's where it is. Okay, the last thing I have here is Northwest Passage ice conditions, which won't take very long. I'm actually presenting on Northwest Passage ice conditions at the Arctic Shipping Forum in November, but I'll open here for questions on any of the talk so far, and then I'll do Northwest Passage ice quickly, and we'll call it a 3-hour wrap.
All right. You heard the man. If anybody's got a thought or a question, now's the time. I've got a question, but I'll reserve it for the very end. So okay. I think people are satisfied so far.
Sure. Okay, sounds good. So Northwest Passage, the things I want to share. Shoot, I should have brought up a graphic earlier. There are 6 Inuit seasons. Oh gosh, the graphic would make it so much easier to explain. There's 6 Inuit seasons. I'll just have to describe it because it'll take me too long to find it. Start in Auyuk, which correlates to August. Open water, snow-free land. The next season, which I can't pronounce, Opingaksak or something, there's snow on the land, but the water is still open. The next season after that is the dark season, when the ice freezes over, and obviously there's still snow on the land. So that's when everything is basically dark, and there's no open water, or very little open water. The next season after that is the very bright season, which is correlates to about March, when you have, trust me, it's bright. like that's where you see the pictures of the Inuit with their antler glasses with a tiny little slit because it's so bright out. You can go blind. Yeah, it's everything's bright. The sun is pretty high in the sky. The days are 12 to 14 hours, 16 to 15 hours long, but it's still very, very cold. Minus 30s usually. And the next season after that is when the land becomes, so the sea is white, but the land is brown. And the next season after that is back to Ayuk. I might have missed one, but you get the idea. So, Northwest Passage has, there was a period of warming in the Arctic Ocean, which seems to have reversed at this stage, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But there was definitely a period of warming from about 2005 to about 2015, which may have now reversed. Whether it has or not depends on whether the person you're talking to is for or against climate change, and they throw graphs and data at you, and you just go, I'm not sure. Okay. What I do know is that I lived in London for 10 years, and when I started, it was minus 31. And a typical Halloween was minus 30s, and now your typical Halloween is minus 5. That I know for sure. Because I was there. I saw it. Okay. Anyway, and minus 5 is not enough to freeze seawater. What am I getting at? So there was a regime with a multi-year ice in the Northwest Passage. And the issue with multi-year ice is the longer ice is frozen, the harder it is. So it's harder for icebreakers to get through. In that scenario, your effective Northwest Passage is through the Amundsen Gulf, through the Coronation Gulf, through the Queen Mud Gulf, up the Larsen Sound, and out the Lancaster Sound. Your key vulnerability for ecology were these ice conditions in the Lancaster Sound. You get a year-round polynya right up here, right off where my map stops, and that's from the currents exiting the Arctic Ocean. They go through a narrow point, and they keep the water open, and there is a lot of whales there because that's where they spend the winter, so they don't drown under the ice. And this area opens fairly early, but I think of it as arcs. You know, a Roman arch? Turn the arch sideways. You get arches, ice arches that form as the ice periodically breaks up. And it's a 6-month process. While this is going on, this is the flow edge. This is the flow edge is the ecological hotspot. You'll have polar bears trolling the flow edge, waiting for seals that are coming up into the ice. They've just finished pupping. They have to get their pups fed and out of the ice before the ice breaks up. And that's what's going on in Lancaster Sound. So that was the key thing the Inuit said in their 1998 North Baffin Regional Land Use Plan is please don't ice break through here during that 6-month period of ice break, because if you think of it Roman arch, if you take out the keystone of the arch, the whole arch falls down. If you have an arch flow edge and an icebreaker goes through it, although it's just 40 feet wide, you've just broken the arch and the whole thing will collapse earlier. The Port of Iqaluit, Frobisher Bay is emptied out every year by one Coast Guard vessel. It waits until late June when the ice is thin enough, and then the icebreaker goes up this side, turns around, and comes back down the other side. Within 12 hours, the whole Frobisher Bay is empty of ice. Every year. It's artificially emptied, and it just takes one icebreaker passage to do it. So that was the key risk back then. Now with ice thinning, which may be thickening again, I don't know. This area of Viscount Melville Sound rarely defrosted, and this became a barrier to the main Arctic Ocean bore. There's a couple of bores inside the Arctic Ocean, these rotating masses, not vertically rotating, but horizontally rotating, and they thrust Arctic Ocean ice this way towards the Canadian Arctic archipelago, which sort of juts out into the Arctic Ocean rather rudely and interferes with the operations of this bore. So these multi-year ice from the Arctic Ocean would sort of get blocked and rounded around so that the Arctic Ocean would more or less treat the Arctic archipelago of Canada as mainland. Okay. Now that the ice is thinned out, you're seeing more and more intrusions of Arctic Ocean multi-year heavy ice into Viscount Melville Sound and even into Amundsen. So this area has become much more risky because of these Arctic Ocean bergs that are now floating around in them. The other factor that's good to know is that there's an important caribou herd called Dolphin and Union. It spends the winter over here and it spends the summers over here. At the end of summer, right after it freezes, they cross down and they spend the winter down here. And right before as things are warming up, so in that season where the ground turns, where the snow melts on the ground, but the sea is still frozen, they cross back and they spend the summer over in Victoria Island. If you are putting like Carney in the Grays Bay port, year-round port and row, if you're putting a year-round port here with ice breaking through here, this caribou herd will be extirpated. There's no question about it. Number two is in March and April, the seals are pupping in caves that they've carved inside the sea ice. So they have a hole that they've dug, not to the surface of the ice, but almost to the surface of the ice, and they allow snow to cover it, and they've pupped up in there. So the seal pup is just above the sea ice, and there's a vertical tube coming out of their burrow straight into the seawater. When an icebreaker goes by, you have a pressure wave. We talked about it earlier, traveling underneath the ice. What do you think that pressure wave does when it comes to a seal burrow? It floods the seal burrow. If the seal is still in the white, cute, fluffy phase, it's not surviving getting wet. It's freezing to death. So I saw some estimates saying 10 or 15 miles on either side of an icebreaker in March and April, every single seal pup will be killed. Take that for what it's worth. I don't know the speed of the icebreaker. I don't know the exact. I think that was done in the context of Coronation Gulf. So I think this project's going to hit a major headache when it gets to NERB, which is an impact review board. What I have argued in the past and what I still argue today is that there is realistic potential market for a seasonal nuke Greenland to Nome, Alaska, those two ports, because they are well-developed ports. They're in year-round ice-free for scheduled icebreaker service to travel from Nuuk, either through the Furin-Hecla Strait this way or around Lancaster Sound in the ice-free season only. And all that icebreaker is doing is it's shoving floating ice out of the way. It's got a lineup of freighters behind it, a full convoy. And if one of those freighters breaks the environmental rules, like you can't do a big freighter can't do one of those big bilge dumps in the Northwest Passage. Forget it. It screws up the ecosystem too much. Like if you catch something like that, to enforce things like that, or if one of them, to keep them on point, because there are some rocky headlands and sandy headlands, especially in Coronation Gulf, that boats just keep on running into. I'm not sure why, because there's a lot of other places, but they keep on running into them. Just make sure they stay in a line and follow the rules all the way through. I can see a market for that. The ships might be able to charge $50,000 or $100,000 each, and they're getting the money back because they're not going through Panama Canal. They're not paying Panama Canal fees, and it's a shorter distance than Panama Canal, and certainly going through Argentina. Okay, I'm done. Questions?
Yeah, that was quite the opus. I love it. Thank you so much. I got a question. So, um, I know that Trump was obviously very impressed with this idea and gave it some endorsement in the incarnation that it was in 2020 under the defunct A2A operation. But it seems like since the meeting with Putin in Alaska, and now there seems to be an intention to float the notion of the Bering Strait rail connection. That's something that we're seeing being even picked up by MSN and mainstream media is talking about this. Are you sensing in your experience? I know you've got your share of disappointment under your belt. Do
Yeah.
you sense that there is some legitimate grounds here where you're feeling optimistic that something new is happening that could open up the door to this stuff, or do you feel like it's a lot of words without a lot of practical ideas behind it?
Um, I, at this stage, would be comfortable to say that a lower 48 to Alaska connection is alive. And I'm not going to point names at who or how we're doing it. Trump is central to it. And am I feeling optimistic? I'm feeling cautiously optimistic that we can see a connection to Anchorage in our lifetimes. And I'd love to be a part of that, obviously. Now, I was going to bring this up earlier and I forgot, and you just reminded me. You know where this is.
Oh, this is the Big and Little Diomedes.
Yes. Yeah. So from a point near from Fairbanks to this point on the west coast of Alaska is approximately 1,100 to 1,200 kilometers with not a lot of elevation change. There is quite a bit of uh, permafrost along the way. Um, the cost the cost for Fairbanks to this point is going to be at least 15 to 20 billion dollars. If you then build out to the edge of the shallow water, like to a pier out to about 50-foot depth on either end, you have 35 kilometers approximate from um, crossing deep water to the two island chain from either side. It's about 35 kilometers. This route envisions a Norwegian floating tunnel, not a full tunnel. So that would be a concrete tube that is anchored to the C4, and it is using these 7 seamounts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, to anchor to. And each one comes within about 100 feet of the surface. So this prospective floating tunnel would be somewhere between 60 and 100 feet deep below the surface of the water, and then would come up for air at the two Diomedes Islands and be connected to the two Diomedes Islands, probably by a short bridge because it's about 100 feet deep between them. I was going to throw this in because I know how passionate you are about this and how you see its strategic importance. Honestly, under the current geopolitical situation, this can't happen. But when I was thinking about the amount of trade coming between China and North America, I was like, yeah, this would be profitable for sure. No two ways about it.
Awesome. Stephen, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about the geostrategic implications and the history going back to the Lincoln era, Russia, U.S. cooperation. I'm just wondering, Peter, if you have equivalents in those two nations, and especially Russia, and if so, have there been any talks or dialogues or sharing of ideas, meetings of minds, that sort of thing? Or is the current political climate in Ukraine kind of making that impossible?
I think I'll put it this way. Matt can answer this question much more thoroughly than I can, but one of the key advantages of the Alberta-centric route to Alaska versus British Columbia is that the railway is 500 kilometers from coast. So it's more defensible against sea-based missiles. That's one of its perceived advantages. I know that I'll stop there because Matt is the expert on where the Russian and Chinese perspectives are on the Bering Strait tunnel.
Well, we definitely like it. That there's I guess we can assume that there's probably people who think in these terms on the other side of the Iron Curtain as far as nation building and thinking very 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 long term. But yeah, we'll find out in the days and weeks and months and years to come. Kelly, what's on your mind?
Um, this is yeah. I've been on for 3 hours here, like just like you, and I did start falling asleep. It's really interesting.
So I should play this
Um,
video for your children when they can't sleep, is what you're saying.
yeah. Um, Peter, you spent a lot of time in the northern countries there. Like, say we could do all this stuff. Um, like people, how would the quality of life be for the people that live there? What am I trying to say? Like you're gonna, like, obviously you need more population, people to do all this work. They have to be attracted up there. Uh, how is their life going to be? Like, like way up in Inuvit and stuff, say, when there's like thousands, even millions of people living there. Because you've lived there.
Um, I think the answer is it depends. And what it depends on is there's two main factors that can reduce the cost of living for folks up there. Number one is shipment of gravel. As I said, in many of these communities, they're basically blasting through Canadian shield rock in order to get their everyday aggregate. And they're paying $150 to $200 a cubic meter to get gravel. And then when gravel pad's on permafrost, you need to put a 3-4 meter base down for your house. So it's costing $1 million, it's costing $600,000-$700,000 to have the gravel pad on which to put your house on before you go anywhere. And you still need to put on the triadetic system. It's crazy. So you can reduce the cost of gravel in some communities that are on or near the line or accessible by barge by some way from the line. Number two would be a land ferry service, providing everyday needs and like a drive-on, drive-off train service for folks, which would greatly reduce the cost of groceries and greatly increase accessibility for those residents of those communities. I one thing you notice is when an indigenous community is connected by road, you tend to get a big sucking sound of young people moving out to the nearest major center for jobs. Except for the few that are able to snag jobs working for the local nation in governance or municipal style affairs. Not every community, and I don't want to be doing constant blank, but you do notice that. Um, and with a train service with scheduled service, you tend not to see that same kind of sucking sound. So I think the train service would go a long way towards long term, keeping those traditional community cultures going. Not to mention with the indigenous ownership component, bringing in some actual real money as opposed to government handouts, where most government grants, half the grant has to be used up just filling out all the paperwork to get the grant. That's part of the reason we need to move on a indigenous ownership from day one, before day one, so that you do it right. It's not just can you do it, it's do you do it right? Do you manage it right? Other communities like High Level, in my mind, are geographically positioned for Calgary style transformation. Like if there's a railway through High Level to Alaska Tidewater, I think High Level will be hitting 500,000 people by the time we retire. And do they have space for it? Yes. Are they ready for it with their current population of 3,000? No. But it's on their radar because we've been telling them this, you have everything. You have everything for heavy industrial major economic expansion if you have a transcontinental railway going through your town.
Yeah, I think
it depends. When I see the cost estimates, it depends on start and end and position. And it also depends on what you're building and how you build it.
yeah, I think I know that this idea was attempted, and due to mismanagement in 2011, it kind of fell apart in Russia for the Umka Science City as sort of a domed nuclear powered Arctic city, like as far north as you could probably get. That was going to house several hundred workers, scientists. I don't think it was fit for families necessarily, but it was reminiscent of a similar thing that Diefenbaker had floated back in '58 for like similar but much bigger in scale scientific dome cities that would also involve families living there permanently. A lot of underground, and they paid something like $70 million for these feasibility studies to be done, which is a lot, especially back in those days. And that would probably be worth sort of, I guess, revisiting as a point of thinking about this Arctic paradigm and large scale habitation in such a strange climate that's not always friendly to um, happy families living, with industrial activity and what have you. But it would definitely involve some new way of thinking. I don't know. Did you ever think about that stuff or like? the like urban planning in regions that far north with tons of people?
Well, isn't that far north? Your winter is basically an Edmonton winter, just longer.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah,
I'm thinking like really, really Arctic, like
yeah, really, really Arctic. Yeah, well, a little bit, like in my wilder dreams, I imagine the railway to Mary River and crossing the Fury and Hecla Strait and putting a giant port at Fury and Hecla Strait. What would that look like? And yeah, the old Diefenbaker plans of the Dome City might start making sense. I've also, same idea for Churchill, very harsh winters. Having a dome would definitely make like, look, they have to worry about polar bears eating their children walking around at Halloween. So, uh, there's definitely idea, in some circumstances, I could definitely see it serving a purpose. I think Churchill could be a great city down the road. Um, yeah, I haven't looked into that too much because I guess one of the questions that go is, well, what material would you use? And having lived in the Arctic, it just seems everything breaks and fails.
okay.
The ground moves incessantly. Things are always moving. Like the buildings, the best. I mean, people build the triadetics. They build foundations to flex. All the windmills I've seen have fallen down, except for the one in Inuvik, which is brand new. Um, so I go, well, I guess that's my practical reason when I thought about it seriously. It's like, there's the grand plan for doming the city of Iqaluit, which, yeah, there's enough population in Iqaluit to warrant that, but if you take out the cars. But and you put in electric buses. But what is material made out of? Because I mean, like we are the BC Place Stadium, the fabric rips half the time. So, and I go just when things are minus 42 and it's 140 kilometer, 120 kilometer an hour wind running for 72 hours, weird stuff happens. Things break, things freeze, there's frost in places you did not even imagine. You you got a plastic toy that was stuck outside all winter and you open it up in the spring and it's full of ice and it's like it's a sealed toy. How did frost get in this thing? I once we once had a mega blizzard in Arvit. 72 hours, 110 kilometers an hour wind. Air temperature was minus 40 and minus 35-ish. Wind chill was in the minus 60s, minus 70s for 72 hours straight. 4 days after the storm ended, there was a flood in my basement because the wind had somehow gotten through the cracks of the skirting of my house. The wind had somehow gone up into my dryer vent, which faces downwards in the middle of my house, gone up through 10 feet of dryer pipe, and it cooled down my dryer, which is not directly attached to my washing machine, but is 2 inches separated from it. It cooled down my dryer so much that it froze the piping inside the washing machine. And when the washing machine defrosted 3 days later, the plastic was not designed to freeze thaw. It cracked, and all the washing machine was releasing water. There was a snowdrift 35 feet high, made of compressed styrofoam style snow on the side of the local grocery store. Like I take things you get a certain sense of just the assumption is this is going to fail once meets real world conditions.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. There's another question. Oh yeah. Carney had announced some funds, and I forget the quantity. Maybe it was 500 million or something. It seemed significant to expand. I don't know, building new ports, but expanding certain ports. And I was wondering if that was um, what is what is he trying to do? Since overall, it seems like the policy emanating from the federal government has been antithetical to big scale development, but I see little ideas like that being floated. Is this like a sign that there's a shift in thinking to try to adapt to a world which is rejecting degrowth, or do you think it's just a confused, you know, underdefined policy uh, coming out of Ottawa?
Um, from what I've seen of the capital announcements from Ottawa, I can't say that I see a grand strategy at this stage. the money going towards, repairing the Churchill Railway. I'm like, that railway has been under repair for 8 years. Like it's taken, sorry, spider was on my leg. It's taken, that railway's been under repair longer than I think it was under construction. And it's still not where it was when it was first built. So at this stage, I'm like, what, this is more project management concerns. Grays Bay, I've already mentioned my concerns about Grays Bay and its potential alternative. It's a potential alternatives, which is either Fearing Hecla Strait or what did I call it? Kings Point. Uh, I have real questions about Grays Bay as anything more. I believe it's a great mining summer port, but I do not believe it is a good place to consider year-round shipping for the caribou for no other reason. Never mind the seals. Um, so I go back to the experience of Baffinland and transportation for the Mary River mine, and which I only touched on briefly, but it became a bureaucratic hellscape, which could have partially been avoided if they'd done a proper alternatives analysis in advance. And the purpose of me doing this map was I was seeing this group has fallen in love with this port. This group has fallen in love with that route. This route has fallen in love with that route. This route wants to ship gas to Kitimat this way. This wants to ship gas to Kitimat that way. But this one follows the same route but doesn't like Kitimat, prefers Stewart. It goes on and on and on, and it's always different routes. And I'm like, let's just put it all in one freaking place. Okay, we'll use rail as our benchmark because that is, as we started said, rail is the mode that is the most limited. If we have that map, we can do proper alternatives assessment a whole lot easier. And that's what the map is intended to serve. Now, would I love to earn a living off that map? Yes. Because of, its development is come at a cost to me of time, but it was also passion, and it was just, as I said, my childhood friends see me working and they go like, this is what you were intended to do. You were intended to do this work. So you're just doing it, right? And so that tells me, even if I'm not being paid this particular moment, I'm doing the right thing right now. And I'm going off on a tangent, so I'll stop there. But my recommendations with the federal persons with whom I've had an opportunity to discuss these things is these are your options, and you should do a proper alternatives analysis on multiple scales: social, economic, ecological, and engineering, all those factors. Consider them all, consider them quantitatively and objectively in a clear format with predefined objectives, and make your decisions from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that what I've taken from your presentation as well, on top of just the brilliance, and I mean, just listening to you speak, it just is so obvious how feasible and clear and necessary this is, but also the way of thinking is very unique, and it's a breath of fresh air that it's so intersectional, and that you're incorporating biogeochemistry, weather formations, the cultural dynamics of the people that are living there, the spiritual relationship of the people to the various land, as well as the very obvious monetary economic concerns on top of the physics. I mean, it's a healthy, natural way of thinking that I think compartmentalization in the education system has really broken us from this, just what I think is a very natural human to do, to look at a problem, think about, using creativity to solve it, and thinking transgenerationally. Like that used to be a very much more common thing as far as I understand it. And we've really fallen out of track with that. So I really, really, really value this whole composition. And do you have like a plan for like a website to showcase this in a way that might have some interactivity, or do you have a plan to make this something that people could go to a website and like play with this map in a manner that they could, check on different parts of it and get like a little educational boxes or something like that to market this in a bigger way?
I had no idea until 2 seconds ago to do that.
Okay, because you
I
could
have
fill like
been,
a whole university program. The way I'm thinking it, like this, but what you've done, frankly, is like a whole program in university, as well as just being cool unto itself.
I appreciate that. I mean that. I think the big, yeah. Well, where the more detailed information. I mean, as I said, I had to turn off a lot of layers on Google Earth because that was showing information that some of which the information I haven't surrendered intellectual property to it, but I've surrendered distribution rights to it because it has to do with higher level people, people with I want to say higher pay grade, but some of the folks that I'm talking to don't have a higher pay grade. Like they are into this as well, and they recognize usefulness, but they're more uh, skilled in the worlds of high finance or political liaison, and also concern about we've all seen some very organized ecological activists that which I don't mind. As I've said, there's some areas I'm very comfortable about drawing lines in, but they, when you're from my profession and you see what they say, you go like, that is not accurate. That is taken out of context and it's been popularized. I remember I had a big argument with one of my professors who was called, school environmental planner. And he was saying the polar bears are going to go extinct because of global warming. And I knew enough about the North, and I said, no, the number of polar bears is actually going up. Because although the polar bear are losing some habitat in some locations to the northern incursions of the grizzly bear, that's more than matched by opening of new ecological areas in the high Arctic. The polar bear didn't have enough, there weren't enough seals before then to support a polar bear population, and now there are. So the overall population of polar bears is actually going up. And he said, well, we're not going to say that because the end goal is for people to believe that polar bears are a keystone species that everybody doesn't want to see go extinct, and we need to use that. I said, but you're lying. He says, I don't care. More important that we fight climate change.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, but with that attitude, you can only do that once or twice, and people start doubting everything you say. And you know where the discussion went from there.
I'm guessing it went silent pretty fast, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Peter, this is such a, like I said, it's really brilliant, and just the authenticity and again obviousness of all your composition, your presentation, and just the vision is so lacking and so necessary. So thank you so much.
Well, my
And
pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. And this video I'm hoping will be useful to many of my colleagues who, you know, can basically use my voice to go to sleep for maybe 6 times in a row now with 3.5 hours.
well, I gotta say, we start with 17 people, we're ending with 17 people, and that's quite, you know, that just shows that there's definitely, and I, as far as I can see, they're not asleep. So that's pretty good.
I'd like to end on one note, which is super positive, which is, in COVID, I was going around saying 3 things bring out the worst in people. One is real estate, the second is divorce, the third is COVID. It brings out the worst in human nature. What I've been discovering doing this and the networking I've done is, you know, one thing that brings out the best in people is nation building. When you talk about nation building and you talk about just things that you can't fight about, this place is frozen, this place isn't. There's a mountain here, there's a river there. Everybody gets it. And they go like, well, here's a poor community, here's a resource. Everybody gets it. Everybody wants to do it the right way. And you just get this sense of community that I have not felt before in the political world at all. And that's something I hope will continue and will continue to grow.
Strong finishing words. That's good. All right. Amen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for showing up this
Thank you,
Sunday,
everyone,
and
for your
look forward.
patience and your time.
All right. Till next Sunday. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.